Whatever. I feel like
Yeah. Then time difference.
it's like half an hour. Oh no, do you lose?
No, it's like an hour.
So you gain an hour, but you lose it. You go on.
Yeah, because like how it comes up. I'm sure they do. Like the first.
One second.
It's like. The wrong one.
I'm so blessed.
I was gonna say. That's so. Thought about it, but that was.
No, that's what I'm saying. It looks so shit, bro. It looks like I'm a non-sphere.
Actually, like.
I'm working as a snow shoveler. No, you. I'm thinking like so unnecessarily humiliated. So I don't just to myself.
I found these. What was it?
It looks like it's up to date. That's what this does.
I think honestly, we have one for this class.
Basically,
I'm gonna be nice.
I'm going to be nice and you.
Yeah.
One person is.
We're not.
All right, folks, let's get started. Welcome everybody back to our final session for PM 343 here. I do want to make people aware of an event coming up this Saturday. Anyone a member of PMI? No members of PMI. Anyone interested in becoming a member of PMI? Project Management Institute. Maybe? Okay. There is a club that's being formed, and I think it's already formed. A student club here on campus. It's a chapter of the PMI, a student chapter. I'm told that it's either low cost or free. They have regular events. I can send out the guy's name. The guy who's forming it is Kagendra Dior. He's an MEM student, and he's passing the baton because he's graduating in December. So he needs to pass the baton. I think he'll probably pass it to another MEM student. In any case, this Career Success Conference is this Saturday. It's an all-day event. I think it's only $50. It might be cheaper for students. They have speakers. They're going to talk about career enhancing, skills that you might need as a project manager, including negotiations. So I think it might be very well worthwhile. It's over in Harper College. Harper is over in Palatine, so it's about an hour's drive from here. I still think it might be worthwhile. I did post the link on Canvas as an announcement. I am glad to say that we do have Shapur Arami with us. Shapur is the CEO of SAI, Advanced Power Solutions. It's a company that does a lot of work with data centers, the power systems behind data centers. As you guys know, it's a booming business. I don't know, Shapur, can you hear us okay?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah, okay. Thank you for the intro.
Okay, thank you for stopping by. Hopefully, we'll get all your projects done in the first hour and a half or so. I know you've got a hard cutoff. I believe it's 6 p.m., right?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward.
Okay, thank you. The agenda for today, we're going to be going through the list that you see behind me here, which starts with MS Data Center at Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin. That's probably the closest hyperscale data center that I'm aware of. Mount Pleasant is just across the border here in Wisconsin. Stargate Data Center after that, so that would be Team 6. Team 7 is the Colossus 2 Data Center in Memphis, which is building on that wonderful legacy that Colossus 1 had. in terms of, and of course, I'm being tongue in cheek here because they basically really upset the Memphis people quite a bit. 3 Mile Island, I put this in with data centers only because the power plant for 3 Mile Island Unit 1 is in support of a data center directly, okay? After that slot of presentations, we're gonna have drug discovery projects with AMGEN, starting with Imdeltra and Maritide. And I believe that would be team 1 and team 2. Then after that, infrastructure projects with Mexico and Interoceanic Corridor, team 8. And that should take us to about 8 o'clock, hopefully without overrunning. Each team gets 10 minutes of presentations and 10 minutes for Q&A. I do want whoever the presenting team is to share their screen, so I'll stop sharing. To share their screen, come on up to the front. The camera's here so that everyone who's online will be able to see you. And if you're sharing your presentation, they should be able to see your presentation as well. So questions or comments? I do want to say before we start with the presentations, just how impressed I am with the quality of the work you guys have done. I think you guys, have, at least from what I can tell, you've gotten something out of it based on what you've put into it. I hope you agree that this has been a valuable course for you. If something like this appeals to you, practical education in terms of management techniques associated with engineers, I would definitely recommend an MEM program for any of you who might be interested. Project management, product management, operations and supply chain. These are the classic topics that we cover, including, of course, accounting, finance, and marketing. So in essence, it's an MBA for engineers, right? And it's not just Northwestern that has it. There's excellent schools like MIT, Stanford, Dartmouth, Duke, Cornell. All of these schools have some excellent programs. If you want to go online, Hopkins and Purdue are probably the online options if you want to do anything online. In any case, I don't want to take away from the teams that are presenting. So team 5, MS Data Center, Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin. You want to come up front and share your screen. We are recording this, so if there's any reason that we shouldn't be recording it, let me know. Otherwise, self-censor if there's something you don't think needs to be out there. We will likely publish this on YouTube, okay? The other advantage you have with this project plan that you put together is you now have a artifact that you can share with companies that might be interested in hiring you. So let me put my water bottle out of your way. All right, Rachel, let's take it away.
Hi, we're group 5, and we are covering the Microsoft as a data center. I'm Jay.
Oh, on the outside.
I'm Margaret. I'm Rachel. Yeah. And so to give a quick overview, we're going to be covering Microsoft's Hyperscale AI optimized data center in Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin. Our final recommendation was to move forward with the investment towards the project, and we'll be covering the details of our decision in our presentation.
Before we delve into any of the analyses, we first define our project scope, beginning with the energy and data requirements. So given that this is a hyperscale data center, the energy requirements will be massive. Phase 1 alone requires 50 megawatts of power, and for reference, 1 megawatt powers around 750 homes. We also want to be efficient about this. So PUE is power usage effectiveness. A perfect score is considered 1, but 1.2 is considered efficient by industry standards. And around 30 to 40% of this energy will be dedicated to cooling purposes. And in terms of land, this is a massive data center spanning 315 acres. So we must comply with industrial and commercial zoning regulations. And because a lot of this land occupies wetland territory, we need to ensure environmental as well. And Microsoft has also expressed interest in expansion. So site selection should account for that. As for building requirements, we are constructing 3 buildings totaling 1.11 million square feet. And a lot of these buildings exceed the 30-foot limit in Racine County, so special permitting will be required for that. Important points of reference will be the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, as well as the Village Zoning Department of Building Codes. In terms of equipment, the facility will hold servers, which are powerful computers. These will be specialized for artificial intelligence using accelerators from NVIDIA and Microsoft. And because these AI servers are very dense, the processing loads will be very high and it will generate a lot of heat, which is why we'll use advanced liquid cooling technologies where fluid circulates in pipes to absorb the heat from the processes, which brings me to the utilities requirements. The facility needs some meter support systems to run. This includes a steady supply of power from the utility company, We Energies. We will also have backup generators in the event of a power outage. For cooling, the system will use water. We approximate this to be around 8.4 million gallons of water per year in a closed recycled loop. And based on this project scope, we proceeded to create a detailed work breakdown structure on the next slide.
To begin the scheduling portion of our project, we first constructed a work breakdown structure using a combination of the existing updates on the Microsoft blog website that says, or that details what tasks have already been completed with existing data center plans. And that gave us a WBS that can be broken down sort of into 8 major phases that walks you through site planning, core construction, commissioning, and testing. And that gave us a WBS of 57 tasks. And there's a sample task that you can see how the amount of information that we included for each task, which includes description, duration, predecessors, and resources assigned, similar to the scheduling assignment that we did earlier this quarter. Using this WBS, we used a start date of November 3rd, 2023, which is the actual start date of the Mount Pleasant data center. And the duration of the project is around 2 years and 9 months with the projected end of September 2nd, 2026, barring any delays in construction. And the phase that takes the most amount of time is the core construction, which lasts around 1.5 years. And on the right-hand side, you can see the screen chart of the first half of our Gantt chart, and the critical tasks are highlighted in red.
So talking about that actual critical path, 19 of the 57 activities in our work breakdown structure actually made it on that, kind of into 4 main categories of activities along that flow. So the first aspect was the planning and permitting, which we found to be really important given that the actual Microsoft data center violates some of the basic zoning regulations in Racine, in the city of Racine, and thus we need to account for the extra time that special permitting requires so we can actually go ahead with the construction, as well as the critical IT build out, which includes building the infrastructure up in a manner that can accommodate the racks of GPUs. There are 2 kinds of GPUs that Microsoft uses. So one is the advanced kind for the higher computational power requirements, and the regular kind. So really putting in that work is part of the critical path. We've identified 3 of the main work packages that took the longest time on the critical path, and these kind of represent opportunities where we can invest additional resources to lower that project overall duration. And these also represent the critical choke points or bottlenecks in the project where any delays can affect the overall project duration.
Yeah, and so talking about our resource and cost analysis, we kind of broke down the different costs, but we got a final estimated total cost for labor of $40 million, which was actually the relatively smaller portion of the total costs. What consisted most was core constructions of infrastructure. So electrical systems constituted about 1.5 billion, mechanical systems around 860 million. And then the single biggest component was IT hardware concerning servers, racks, network equipment at around $2 billion, giving our total estimation of the project costs being around $6.9 billion.
We also wanted to estimate the expected revenue once this data center is up and running. So it's important to note that this data center is going to internally support Microsoft's AI services, including OpenAI, Microsoft AI, and Copilot. So to estimate this final revenue, we made some assumptions here. So we estimated the capacity to be at about 300,000 GPUs. The utilization rate is at 50% and about 8,760 working hours per year. And we also estimated the GPU value to be $4 per GPU hour. And this led us to our final estimation for the annual revenue at about $5.25 billion. Now, within our assumptions, we tried to err on the side of being more conservative, so the actual revenue will likely be higher than this number that we calculated here.
So using all the information from the last 2 slides on costs and revenues, we put together a quick financial model that takes us through the NPV across the 20-year span of the project, which is again a conservative estimate. It probably will last longer than that. So we see that in the first 3 years, the NPV is decreasing due to the initial fixed cost investment of actually building the facilities. But from year 4, when the facility is expected to be completely operational, we see that linear growth in NPV that is maintained throughout the lifetime of the project. We see that the payback period, which is marked in red on the graph here, is around year 7, which is when the cost of investment is actually recovered by Microsoft. The NPV for the project at that 20-year horizon mark was around 19.5 billion, with an IRR of around 30.8%, which was significantly higher than the weighted average cost of capital used for the project, which was around 7.5%, typical of those used for hyperscale or mega project constructions. So with these two features, the positive NPV and the IRR being significantly greater than the WACC, our decision was to go ahead with the investment.
Now that we've decided to go ahead, we want to address the different risks that Microsoft needs to account for as they build this data center. So first, going over some technical and infrastructural risks. These include grid instability. Long transformer lead times can take up to 210 minutes to get a transformer, and also water usage concerns. So some strategies they can use to mitigate these risks would be using an AVP design, essentially having 2 independent electrical paths connecting to the grid. So if one fails, they have backup. Also, having early transformer procurement will help them so that these can be ready. They don't have to wait 210 weeks if there is an issue. And utilizing closed loop cooling so that instead of sourcing water and dumping it out, they can recycle the same water to minimize that water usage. Looking at environmental and climate risks specific to Mount Pleasant in Wisconsin, these include flooding, winter storms, and high winds. So some strategies here could be to include flood-resistant designs. Specifically for heavy snowfall as well will be essential because Mount Pleasant has seen 24 inches of snow in just 24 hours. So it needs to be able to handle big storms like these, and also just an awareness of weather conditions during construction. And because this is such a large-scale data center, it is at risk for cyber and supply chain risks. Some strategies here include zero trust architecture. So this essentially requires that every connection to the data center will need to be authenticated. They can also make use of penetration testing, essentially simulating different ways that people can try to attack the data center, find weak points, and improve upon them. They can also use AI to try to flag any unusual behavior. And it's also important to vet vendors to try to avoid having any compromised components being built into the system. And lastly, as far as sustainability and compliance, they need to account for stricter energy codes, chemical discharge rules, and also the way that they will be contributing to carbon emissions. So some strategies here include renewable PPAs, having energy storage so that they can smooth different demand spikes, and having transparent reporting so that they can garner public support and trust.
So in order to ensure that the project is compliant with regulatory standards, there are 3 main areas we looked into that allows this kind of compliance. The first and most important being water governance, given the 8 million gallons of water used annually by the Mount Pleasant data center. So the Great Lakes Compact is an agreement that enforces really strict rules on how much water can be extracted from the Great Lakes. And the only exception to this is if the site is on a straddling community, which kind of spans across 2 banks of the lakes. And Mount Pleasant, which is where the site is constructed, actually does comply with this compact agreement, which we've seen where the previous industrial contractor, Foxconn, actually who used to own the site, was granted permission by the federal government to actually extract more water than the Mount Pleasant data center ever will during its lifetime. So in that sense, it complies with government standards, as well as environmental regulations, considering the quality of the wastewater that is discharged after it passes through the recycling loops. It kind of will partner with the WDNR and municipal treatment to match kind of expected standards for that area. And finally, looking into planning for future climate resilience, given that climate change is increasing the risk of extreme weather, like flooding, droughts, or extreme precipitation. And this kind of ensures that we're thinking about construction is done in a manner that considers the vulnerabilities that the grid can have, so as to prevent high usage during peak time and preventing the loss of power for the residential areas nearby in Wisconsin. Thank you guys for your time.
Right. So are you consuming 8 million gallons per year, or are you actually reusing them in a closed loop system?
Yeah. So out of those 8 million, 3 million gallons of water is the expected amount of consumption by the actual data center. The remaining 5 million are expected to go back into Lake Michigan.
And that's compliant with the Lake Michigan Accord.
Yes.
Okay, so
The maximum amount that can be extracted annually is around 9 or 10 million gallons. So well under that.
you modeled this over 20 years and you showed it like a 2 or 3 year payback for
Yep.
crossover, break even, right? How often do the GPUs need to be updated? I know this is a fast-moving technology. It seems like every year NVIDIA's got a new version of the GPU. Did you factor in upgrades to the GPU and how?
Yeah. So we didn't explicitly factor in GPU upgrades, but we did consider depreciation because of the increasing quality of technology. So instead of factoring in increased costs, we built it in as increased depreciation of the server facilities over kind of the 20-year period. So we started with a depreciation of around 10% in the first year of complete operations, and that increased that by 10%, which should kind of be reflective of the cost that the data center should absorb by upgrading their GPUs. Because I think that Microsoft is like they do buy GPUs from NVIDIA, but a big part of this project is also sourcing GPUs and producing them in-house, which should reduce the costs in the long run, especially.
Is there sufficient power? I mean, where's the power going to come from?
I can answer that. The power is going to come from We Energies. They have built or they've made several contracts with the company in order to make sure that it has scalable. So first they built a new solar project in order to generate new energy via solar energy, and then also they've also constructed a new substation as well as improved their transmission and distribution grids to rewire everything in order to make sure that the energy consumption by the data center isn't affecting how much energy costs for local.
So the source is not being built for this project, it's already there?
Half of it is already there, but then with that new substation as well, they're able to reroute energy from other parts of or other like surrounding areas to the data center.
Yeah, okay. All right, any other questions?
Sorry, I might have missed this, but what does energy consumption look like in that area, just residentially or right now? And how much would this data center actually require on top of that?
Yeah, I think I can take that. So it requires 450 megawatts of energy per year or power per year, which is around the average of, I think, around 300,000 households in Wisconsin. That's kind of the estimate that Microsoft has put out. But just to give you context of like overall hyperscale data centers in the US, last year or in 2023, they used 764 terawatts, which is around 5% of the total energy consumed in the US as a whole, with that number expected to go up to around 12% with advancements in AI requiring computational power to go up. So that number is expected to grow to around 12%, which is a pretty substantial number of the total US energy consumption.
The reason he's asking that question is what's the expected impact on energy prices going forward to the residents in the area? Are they going to see higher prices as a result of more competition for limited resource?
I think that Margaret briefly touched on this maybe before, but I do know that there was a contract that was signed with We Energies so that this shouldn't impact residential prices as much, and they shouldn't see a huge impact from this project on what they're paying.
The traditional complaints about hyperscale data centers in particular by residents is noise, right? Water usage and water table depletion, but you're drawing from Lake Michigan here, so that shouldn't be an issue. Power and power rates, but also blackouts and blackouts that may come from surge demand coming from the data center. How close is this facility to residences? I mean, is Mount Pleasant a residential area or is it a largely commercial area?
I don't know exactly the answer to that, but for the noise concern, they are building a barrier that is about 30 feet tall to try to prevent the noise from the data center from affecting those outside of it.
It's probably close to a residential area. Because I've been through Mount Pleasant and my recollection is it's largely residential, but it's also kind of rural too. So the houses are it's not compact, it's not an urban setting. So
it's also pretty important to note that before the Mount Pleasant data center was scheduled to be built there, another industrial manufacturer called Foxconn actually owned that land. And I'm assuming that an industrial power plant would kind of, have more sound and more water and pretty much more pollution than a data center.
Well, I mean, they'd be fabricating circuits, so there's probably a little bit of a contamination issue there. Shapur and I can tell you many stories about Foxconn, but at least in this country, a lot of what they promised has never really been delivered. So it's not unusual that they have an empty site. Shapur, any comments about what you saw here? Or any questions I should have asked?
No, actually, it's a good project. And team did a good job of capturing main topics. So obviously there are a lot of detailed questions behind it that you guys asked, few of them. But one of the things will be the requirement of the human resources. So how many of the employees they're gonna need, and what is the life of the whole building is gonna be. So those are some of the questions that you can get into a lot more detail. But overall, very nice job.
Yeah, I agree with Shapur about the this is a rural area, so there isn't a high density of population. Probably the closest town would either be Milwaukee, Kenosha, maybe the borders of Chicagoland. In terms of engineers, not a large quantity. I mean, a lot of the engineers graduate from Madison. This might be too far for them to want to live here and work here. How many people have to be employed by this place over time, not for construction, but for operations? It's pretty small, right? It's mostly automated.
Yeah, so in terms of, I think, total number of people, the kind of resource allocation budget we had accounted for was around 5,000 people on Microsoft project over the course of 3 years. So I don't know how much that is relative to the size of a normal construction project, but I do know that a lot of the employees that Microsoft uses are contracted from previous projects that they've done across the US,
Okay.
given that they work with like the same set of.
So they go where they're
vendors.
told to go.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, all right. Any other comments? I think you're getting a sense in a program review, right? Usually the director or the VP who's in the room, or even the CEO, if it's a smaller company, will be asking these questions in some depth to understand, first of all, do you understand? And secondly, have you accommodated for some of these concerns in your plans, right? So overall, I thought you did a great job. You looked at the regulatory, every data center has four main components, right? Networking, power, compute, and cooling. And I think you addressed all of them. I think in general, your focus was more on compute and cooling. Network, it's kind of hard to focus on that because it's not clear where the access points are to the internet over there, but the power, I think, was the big issue from my perspective. Is there enough power, and will it be consistent, right? And will they have to do any generation on site, or are they going to rely completely on the grid? But you're telling me the grid can handle it. So, all right. Otherwise, thank you. Nice job. All right, Stargate Data Center Team 6. Yeah, sure, go ahead. Yeah. You want more screen? Yeah. You probably have a smaller font. Very bad. All right, Team 6, take it away.
Hey everyone, we're Team 6. We did our project on Stargate, which is OpenAI's version of the data centers. My name's Evram.
I'm Oliver.
I'm John.
I'm Alexandria.
And I'm Kadir. So our central point of this project was looking at different things from budgeting to resources to planning to scope and evaluating different aspects of the Stargate endeavor as a whole, the 500 billion investment over 4 years. And we've taken all of these aspects and we've come to a decision as to whether or not we think this is a project that should be pursued.
Yeah, so kind of jumping into the location. So unlike the previous presentation, Stargate is a big multi-campus project with its main flagship being housed in Abilene, Texas. It also consists of 6 satellite campuses, 3 in the Southwest, 3 in the Midwest, and outside the scope of our project, but important to note, it has international endeavors too. One planned in the Patagonia region of Argentina and another in the UAE.
Yeah, so this slide kind of shows the core resources necessary for Abilene to be able to scale on schedule. So based on our testing through the project, we saw that power and equipment were our items that were used to pace the project. Land and labor were pretty much in line, but in order for them to be utilized to their full capacity, we would have ERCOT upgrades and renewable PPAs to arrive in time. But the good thing is that the approval phase is almost largely complete, and our 2 initial first halls will be used as the foundation for the rest of the project. So the next 2 years will largely just be focused on execution.
Yeah, so as a brief overview of the work breakdown structure for Abilene, the main campus. We allocate about a month for initial planning, so like budget estimations, market analyses, And then that kind of pivots towards an infrastructure design where we hire some architects to get a grid layout for how the Abilene site would be formulated. And then there would be like kind of like a 5 months long procurement process. So like sourcing all the GPUs, utility equipment, HVAC stuff, as well as construction, which is the bulk of thing, which goes from like July of 2024 all the way to the end of 2025. And kind of within that construction area, we install the GPUs, configure the network, and get clients on our servers, which gets us all the way to the mid part of 2026, which is kind of the way that OpenAI has been scheduling this part of the project. Yeah, when it comes to the schedule analysis for the satellites, they're all in different phases of their development. A lot of them have started construction, while one is still about to start, and a couple are still pending regulatory and legal approval. A lot of them are on a phased delivery system, which, as mentioned, Abilene has 2 of its halls open already and is planning to make 6 more. A lot of the other satellites are planning on opening 1 or 2 halls to start and then fleshing the rest out throughout the rest of the project. And as you can see, a lot of them are either planning to open by the end of 2026 and hopefully then finish fleshing out the entire project before the 2029 deadline.
So our revenue analysis boiled down to the key point that revenue is driven by GPU per hour consumption. And we also held a couple assumptions, which is that stable compute pricing would be maintained, as well as demand growth over the next couple of years, consistent with what we see in the industry now. The major constraint for our revenue lies in the GPUs. On one hand, if they are undersupplied, potentially by a delay in GB200 chip shipments from NVIDIA, this could push back our revenue plan by 1 to 2 quarters. On the other hand, if they're oversupplied and the industry capacity ends up exceeding that demand, the utilization of these chips will drop 15 to 25%. In order to mitigate these in the long run, we would put together long-term GPU and power purchasing contracts, potentially tied to tiered pricing models, as well as using modular hardware such that we can easily repair and upgrade our data set.
Yeah, so looking at an overall like future-looking recommendation, we would say to go. Currently, they're at about 80% of their energy plan and 90% of their financial investment. They've got 2 buildings of the Abilene flagship campus operational, which can serve as a baseline for not only the rest of Abilene, but all of the satellite and the rest of the project. They have both corporate and governmental backing. It's important to note this entire project was announced at the White House with President Trump, and just having that sort of backing can be important in the long run. And with satellites opening by end of year 2026, it'll just continue to see further progress with the project.
So we were looking at different risks to the Stargate initiative as a whole, and one major risk we looked at were company risks, namely OpenAI as the main tech partner and the primary anchor tenant of these data centers. So I categorized the risks into 3 main groups. We have strategic risks, operational risks, and financial and regulatory risks. All in all, the biggest risk to OpenAI is how much demand they could lose from increasing rival competition and increasing efficiency in other AI labs. And then there's also risk financially for them, because they're burning through a lot of money and they're losing investor confidence as well. And then on top of all of that, there's some talks of antitrust worries by certain lawmakers in both EU and the United States, because it's a very large partnership between Microsoft, OpenAI, SoftBank, and Oracle. So in terms of mitigation, it's hard to give OpenAI mitigation feedback on improving their operations internally. But from an external point of view, a lot of the lack of certainty or lack of confidence could be solved with greater transparency and clearer messaging to both investors and regulators as to their future plans going forward as a company.
Yeah, going on to some market risks, they're kind of along the same lines as the company risks. I think the biggest thing is just the GPU supply. Currently, NVIDIA's backlog is like huge right now. So very important to have long-term contracts with GPU suppliers and potentially even have backup suppliers in case NVIDIA can't fulfill all the. Another thing that was mentioned previously is technology obsolescence. Yeah, like GPUs are being updated every year or so. So designing the data center with like a modular design so that chips can be upgraded very like seamlessly is hugely important to being the data center up to date and not losing cash later down the road. Another thing is capital availability. Interest rates can definitely impact the amount of money investors are willing to put into this project. So diversifying the amount of financing you have is critical to making sure this project's on track.
So the location risks for Stargate, both the Texas and the satellite sites, kind of boil down into three major sections: the rollout risks, the physical environmental risks, as well as the social and political risks. So as AI advancements are continuing to increase the pace, the rapid hyperscale data center build out, we don't anticipate to slow down anytime soon. So there's a lot of demand for these multi-megawatt capable campuses that are usually located in quite a limited number of regions, and that has driven up the prices for land, water, and power grid resources. On the physical and environmental side, we see water sourcing as the key risk for Stargate. One example of where this came into play is at the Donna Ana, New Mexico site, where water sourcing has held up legal disputes over their water basin, as well as the risk posed by bottlenecks in grid capacity and transmission. As Evan was mentioning, technology being updated also means that the grid must need to be updated. So coordinating grid upgrades with utility companies can ensure that this is not out. The social political risk really boils down to engaging the local communities as soon as you can, since data centers honestly bring limited job to the community based on their relative footprint for power, size, and water. So engaging that community has a real impact, but it must be consistent before, throughout, and after.
In terms of the timeline risks, it's a little bit less about feasibility and more about coordination. So the regulatory delays often create uncertainty when it comes to moving resources back and forth across different sites. And if there are delays, it can often push construction start dates from 6 to even 24 months. For the construction delays and risks, it's pretty similar. If a contractor even slips by just a quarter, it can add up to 3 to 9 additional months in commissioning timelines. And the most important point is cross-site synchronization. So if 2 or 3 major sites slip by 9 months or more, the operational capacity can drop by up to 20%. So to mitigate this and try and meet our 2027 goal, it depends on keeping all of our sites moving in parallel and to resolve our regulatory gaps early on before they begin to cascade.
Yeah, so in all, Stargate is the largest data center project in the world, and it is currently on track to be a success. I mentioned previously the numbers, they're close to 100% energy and financial investments. They can be seeing close to 10 or 11 digit returns once everything's fully operational. As mentioned by everybody, they have risks, but they are both manageable and mitigatable. And then finally, this can be the blueprint of all future AI data centers based on like Abilene having 2 halls already available and hopefully some satellites being available by the end of the year. So yeah, there's never really been a project like Stargate. While others have been shooting for the moon, they're shooting for the stars. And if they succeed, it's going to transform the AI infrastructure world forever. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions?
Nice job. Thank you. I didn't really see a regulatory schedule. You talked about regulatory delays. Thinking that you've got all these multiple sites involved, the regulations must be horrendous in terms of state and local multiplied by every site available, right? Is that the critical path of the project? And if not, what is?
I think most of the critical path is within the construction, since that's like taking up most of the bulk. I think it's like almost like a year and a half. So that's kind of started in 2024 and it's going to finish end of 2025. And the final project ends like kind of on July of 2026. So
as an outside observer, it looks to me like 2 years, and we saw this with the previous team too. 2 years for construction seems really aggressive.
Yeah.
I mean, is this like a 24/7 build plan, or I mean, how do you build something this complex of this scale in under 2 years in the U.S. no less, right?
Yeah, part of that comes from just the diversification of the satellites. I mean, Abilene being their main flagship, it's taken the longest. They've dealt with like the largest part of it there, but as you're saying, like the different regional and local and all those different types of governments have been dealing with regulations, but because they're small enough, like for example, Lordstown, Ohio is meant to be a like rapid proof of construct build. They're taking a former GM plant and like just changing it into an AI data center where only about like a quarter of it is going to be dedicated to AI, like the data center part. That one's hopefully going to be done in a year once it starts going.
But Abilene is a new build from the ground up, right? You're not taking the existing facility.
Yeah, and they finished their first 2 halls in I want to say July-ish, and they've been working on expanding the other 6. So they've been able to at least get a footprint into the ground and utilizing those two to kind of spring them to kind of like get an idea based off of how that's going and flesh out the rest.
I wouldn't assume that just because you have Washington support, that somehow the state and local regulators are gonna accelerate things for you. They can have their own opinions and their own expectations and requirements. So don't assume that blessings from, I mean, we had blessings from Washington for the Foxconn plant in Wisconsin. It went nowhere. So there's all sorts of risks, and I think you guys did a good job of covering that. Why is it that most of your locations seem to be water starved? And is that one of your biggest risks? I know you mentioned water, but New Mexico, Abilene, Texas, these are not water saturated locations. And you clearly need it for cooling.
Yeah, honestly, I couldn't answer to why the specific location. Yeah, as we were saying, in terms of like it being a critical path type of thing, especially in the Donna Ana, New Mexico site, we saw that was just even with like as you said, Washington's approval, it was the local government that ended up halting construction in the first place due to the water scarcity. So
obviously the locals are worried about it, right? They don't want their wells to go dry just because there's a new data center.
When it came to a place, I don't remember which Midwestern one, but they were doing not exactly, I don't know the word for it, but they had a bunch of different just candidates, and they eventually ended up picking one almost like an auction, just grabbing one. So there was kind of a symbiosis in the fact that they were looking for a place, but like a place like Lordstown had like not big urban, like they're to get their economy jump started. We're looking to kind of get the type of influx into their
More than likely, the decision was made for these sites based on a similar analysis to what you guys just did in terms of costing and risks and schedule, but mostly costing in terms of, okay, what incentives can they get from the state and local authorities, as well as what are the operating costs in that location, et cetera. So when you do your analyses at this stage, it's always important to bridge to the last analysis to say, okay, what assumptions did they make and what are still valid or invalid at this point? Management's going to say, hey, how does this bridge back to what we originally thought? Right? And if it's getting better or getting worse, you need to have that trajectory in your mind in terms of, hey, oftentimes these projects get worse as you look at them as time goes on, slippages, extra costs, right, et cetera. You dealt with the GPU thing, I think, in terms of understanding that you need to upgrade along the way. Right? You can't just have static GPUs for 20 years. Any other thoughts or comments? Anything from you, Shapur? Any thoughts?
Yeah, and actually, this is a good job with the team. So it's a great project. So obviously very large. One of the questions, I don't know, you guys ask yourself or you don't answer to it. Why do they spread it throughout the country? Why they are not concentrating in certain location that they can manage better? Because cost is different for each location. Is that right?
Yeah, that's different. I mean, part of it also comes to if you try to with something so big, a 10 gigawatt plant, trying to concentrate that in one place is just such a load on that general region that it may not even be feasible, especially I'll mention like there's a lot of these places end up being in the regions, and there's already enough like competition and other sources sucking up the energy, sucking up other resources that you need. So trying to concentrate it might only cause more issues on that front from like a diverse.
Texas is known to have kind of an unstable grid. I mean, first of all, the Texas grid is separate from all the other grids in the US, right? It's almost like a grid within a state. Most other grids, there's the Eastern and Western interconnect. Those are, multi-state in nature, right? Texas is unique in this regard, but it's also known for not being very ruggedized and not very resilient to climate changes. So I would think that would be one of your risks if you're relying on the grid, which it sounds like you are.
Yeah, one other thing you guys just mentioned, in order to build this magnitude of project, you need to have two kind of resources. You need to have natural resources, which is the power and water in this situation, and land. And also you need the human resources. So finding all those resources in one location, it becomes significantly challenging to do that. And by the way, the water resources is very important. One of the questions Mark asked is, when you have AI like that, the cooling system is literally necessary to have a very strong cooling system. And water is one of the area that you need to have that cooling system.
And that's actually a source of a lot of innovation too. How do you get cooling down to the circuit level? I mean, it's one thing to have, racks that are cooled, but you want to get each circuit and individual circuits cooled while you're running all this huge amount of power. So it's kind of an incompatible thing, right? Let's get liquid cooling next to the power, but that's the challenge, right? And how do you move that heat? And then once you get it out of the building, what do you do with the waste heat, right? So cooling towers and all that stuff. So that's a big part of the design, but I thought you guys did a good job. Any other comments?
Good job.
Thank you. Nice job. So far, so good. I think we're tracking to our time. How about now, Team 7, Colossus 2? This is Elon Musk's follow-up to the ever-popular Colossus 1. Anyone from Memphis here? Protest signs? These things get emotional.
We have a member on Zoom.
Okay. Let's make sure we can hear her okay. Is it Tadapa?
Yes.
Can you test your audio, Tadapa? Make sure it works okay?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, that's good. All right, take it away, Team 7.
All right, we're Team 7. We're in charge of the Colossus 2 data center project from XAI in Memphis. My name is Nicholas Ensign.
I'm Wendy Huang.
And Tadapa. So here's a brief overview of today's presentation. We'll start with a background and talk about timeline analysis. Next, we'll cover resource planning and cost assessment, and then we'll review key findings from a risk analysis and give our final recommendations. So for a bit of background, over the past few years, AI computer demand has increased rapidly, and it is driven by increasingly large foundation models and rapid adoption across many industries. In terms of the market, it is expected to grow at more than 30% annually through 2030, but this growth is kind of constrained by major bottlenecks, such as lead times for key equipment, and these can lead to multi-year delays. In terms of the competitive landscape, major contributors in the space includes AWS, who is scaling Trainium, Google and Microsoft and Meta, who are also building AI-centric campuses as well. We're also seeing rapid growth in the GPU cloud specialist field as well. For Colossus 2 is a 1 million square feet hyperscale AI data center in Memphis, South Tabin region. It is built around a large liquid-cooled GPU cluster with high bandwidth networking, and the facilities rely on a high power system supported by advanced cooling systems that helps to manage thermal loads. It operates under zero trust security model with continuous monitoring, and all major work streams run in parallel towards completion in June 2029.
For this project, there are a few key regulatory approvals that we need to secure. Firstly, at the federal level, we must go through the Environmental Protection Agency's NSR and PST review, which is just and required air quality permits required for all major new facilities. We also need to obtain a Title V operating permit to get a MPDES stormwater and discharge permits. At the state level, Tennessee requires air permits, zoning, and site plan approval, stormwater permits, and a Memphis light, gas, and water interconnection study for the power. Both of them are required for Mississippi, and plus that Mississippi needs a zoning and special use approval. Overall,
This gives us a permitting framework we must satisfy before anything can happen and before any major construction. For the land requirements, the data center footprint is about 1 million square feet, requiring 60 to 100 acres. Heavy industrial zoning, space for mechanical yards, and an on-site substation that can scale towards 1 gigawatts. Cooling water will come from treated wastewater nearby directly, and large tanks to store the cooling water are much needed for the project. On the building side, we plan to retrofit the existing industrial structure into a 2-level AI data center. The ground floor for power, MEP, and operations, the upper level for GPU halls and storage. The building needs to reinforce the structure and deep foundation to support the high loads. Especially to store GPU, there are 3 major factors we need to consider: temperature, humidity, and dust control. Special system requirements include a battery yard for grid support, off-site gas turbine generation, and a dedicated wastewater recycling plant supplying 10 to 13 million gallons per day. So these are the core land and building requirements we need to deliver for this.
Now we're going to move into the timeline analysis, and it's important to note that while looking at this timeline, it's not necessarily linear. A lot of these different workflows need to happen in parallel in order for us to maintain a project schedule that is it's usable for XAI as the AI boom continues. So permitting, governance, and site acquisition all run in parallel at the beginning of the project to ensure that the project is going to stay on track, that our site is legally acquired and regulated. And then the next step that is a major risk in this project is the equipment procurement. There are plenty of different equipment that we need to acquire that have very, very long lead times for this project. Not only are these equipment, is this equipment for the data center itself, but also for the power plant that powers this data center, which include turbines, and then also for the data center, we have transformers, switch gears, et cetera. And then we have so mechanical and cooling, electrical, building structure, and architecture. Those also run in parallel to design all of the systems that will go in place into the data center. And then after the IT fit out, which is where we implement all of our GPUs and ensure that the data center is operational, we need to make sure that we test it. We need to train our operators on the operational, we need to train our operators. And then also we need to make sure that we have integrated cybersecurity throughout. It's important to note this number 11 here, which is the community stakeholder and engagement. During the Colossus 1 project, which is in the same area as the Colossus 2 project, there was backlash throughout the Memphis community because the XAI decided to go around the regulations and register their turbines as mobile and not permanent. And they also mentioned that they only had 7 turbines up and running when truly they had 35. So making sure that we are on good terms with the community is necessary for to limit the amount of hearings and reviews that we subject ourselves to. We'll look at this in a Gantt chart format. So these are 18 different steps that we have built out in summary form here. As you can see, the community and regulatory stakeholder management is almost throughout the entire project. And that's important so that we let the community know what's happening every step of the way. The permitting and regulatory approvals as well are another major step in this project, and that span probably 3 years of the project, which is important to make sure that we are as compliant as possible because we're under extra scrutiny after the failure that was Colossus 1's regulatory issues. And then throughout, we also just work on the structural fit, the electrical infrastructure implementation. And then finally, we have our handover closeout and power on. And so this is going to take us from March 7th of 2025 all the way until June 26th of 2029. So about 4.5 years. And then if we look at the critical path overview, these are about 24 of our 140 specific tasks that make up the project. And a very important area here is that procurement time. If you can see it right up here is our procurement of these large scale equipment that we need to secure. And so our strategy to limit that as a risk is to procure them as early as possible during the design phases. So before we're finished with the design phases, we're going to try and acquire these.
Right now, getting into the resource planning, we divided our resources into two groups, one being human resources and the other being physical resources. To start with human resources, we have exactly 42 categories of human resources distributed thoroughly throughout those 13 categories throughout the project schedule. And moving into the physical resources, we have non-hardware and hardware resources. So for the non-GPU, we found that through research, the general window or range industry benchmark for large-scale data centers for roughly this size, being 1 gigawatt, would be between 10 to 12 million. So we decided 11 million per megawatt. And with the 1 gigawatt criteria we needed to meet, multiply that by 1,000, you get to 11 billion. So that's the first part of our large initial investment. This all again goes into power infrastructure, cooling, mechanical systems, site development, etc. Moving into GPU resources, we have the GPU power type. The GPU we selected was the NVIDIA H100 GPU, which comes out to 1.2 kilowatts per GPU. And with the count, after calculating the total number required, we came to 780,000 GPUs required to meet that 1 gigawatt criteria, and found that we researched that would cost roughly $30,000 per GPU, coming out to a total of 23.4 billion. And so that initial non-GPU expenditure with the 23.4 would come to our initial investment for CapEx. So moving on to our cost assessment. This cost assessment was done through a 10-year financial model of the first decade post-operation. So moving from June 26, 2029 on to 2039. So user, as I said, consists of that initial investment of $34.4 billion. And then there are also two more capital expenditures in year 6 and year 7, both each being an $11.7 billion GPU refresh cost. Essentially, the GPUs we said that, or through research, we found that GPUs typically have a cost of 5 years, but if they are maintained very well, they can get to 7 to 10 years. So we decided to kind of split the difference. In 6 and 7 years, we will be refreshing 50% of the GPUs respectively per year. Moving into the financial metrics, annual revenue was calculated with the number of GPUs multiplied by the utilization being 75%, multiplied by hours in a year, 8,760, and then all of that multiplied by our selected price per GPU hour, which we landed on $2 per GPU hour. So that all came out to an annual revenue of $10.25 billion a year. Annual OpEx was our 1 gigawatt multiplied, annual OpEx was the power expenditure plus the staffing expenditure summed with our operations and O&M expenditures. For staffing, because this hasn't been mentioned yet, the way we went around to solve that or find that number was we found that data centers of this size typically have a staffing proportion of 1/3 or 33% per megawatt in your data center. And so multiply that by 1,000 again for that gigawatt. And we landed on 330 staff within the data, or technicians within the data center at all times. And then also we found that the average technician salary for data centers in Memphis, Tennessee was $99,000. Multiply that and you sum it with the rest of the expenditures and you get an annual OpEx of $1.07 billion per year. And then obviously the operational cash flow would be OpEx subtracted from revenue, which came out to $9.18 billion per year. And now finally, the investment metrics. Our 10-year results, or the first decade results, our net present value came out to $7.75 billion at a discount rate of 11%, which is phenomenal. And our IRR came out to 17%, or a whole 6% over our discount rate or hurdle for investors. And our payback period came out to between 3.7 to 3.8 years. So we roughly have some data to 3.75 year.
Awesome. And then so just to talk about our risk assessment and mitigation, the general domains of the risks that we covered were macroeconomic risks, regulatory risks, construction and scheduling risks, technology integration risks, and then also operational risks as well. And so some ways that we are mitigating these risks is to procure early, as we mentioned before. Another way is to use modular prefab kind of stacks that we can move in so we have less assembly time after we procure parts. And that way we have a little bit more flexibility on that front. As also we were working with parallel permitting to try and make sure that we get that the building done as quickly as possible. And then on the side of operational or technology risks with cybersecurity issues, we're making sure to do security by design. So as we design, we are implementing security measures instead of just kind of slapping it onto the end, which is going to ensure that we don't have any holes in our defenses.
So as mentioned before, our NPV was well positive and our IRR was well above the hurdle. So the strong, with the strong value creation, it was strongly suggested that we go forward with this project with our base level schedule, or our base case schedule. Our key milestones, again, moving back to the scheduling, was the range of 2025 to 27 being the permitting and site prep, 26 to 28 being our core infrastructure build, early 2029 being the commissioning and readiness, our operation readiness milestone, and then the first decade having steady operations and high quality maintenance throughout the first decade to positive results. Our strategic rationale for our rather, I can kind of like for future expectations and exit strategies, marginal gains would come from future GPU generations or new updated GPUs. And then also our 5 to 7 year hardware refresh would also fall under that category. And then lastly, our optional exit that we found would be, since this data centers would seem to be extremely successful, maybe a total or partial sale of the hyperscale data center to a sovereign cloud or buyer would be a great exit strategy.
Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you. Nice job. You talked about picking the NVIDIA GPU. Is that what they're going to go with? I thought Tesla had, or Elon had his own GPUs.
He's going with the NVIDIA ones.
Yes, for this site.
For this site, he's going with the NVIDIA's the H100s. And so that's what he already has in there. They also mentioned that he may switch to B100s or B200s in the end. We calculated them all based on the H100s, but it's possible that those other GPUs are also used, but still.
So the other GPUs that he's custom designed are for embodied AI. They're not meant for training sites like this.
Yeah, he's only outsourcing.
How does he get priority when he's such a minority player coming so late to the game?
That's a great question. I think it's because he's buying so many of them.
But they all are.
They all are, yeah.
Everybody is.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we need to look more into that priority.
Especially when he's competing with NVIDIA.
Yeah.
I mean, he's literally designing chips against NVIDIA. So you got to wonder strategically, how does he prioritize within NVIDIA, the shipments for him?
Yeah.
It's got to be tough. Modularity, you talked about modularity in terms of constructing. I think modularity makes a lot of sense in terms of we talked about laddering, schedule laddering, right? So while you're building one module, you can be installing the next or the previous one, and you can literally do a lot more parallel work using modularity. So this is where the design of the system and the implementation kind of overlap in terms of, you have to think in terms of the end in mind, right? So if the end is to install this in an expeditious way, you need to have that modular design to make that happen. One risk that nobody has called out, and everybody probably should have, all these GPUs come from one location. They come from TSMC, right, in Taiwan. They say NVIDIA on them, but NVIDIA is the designer, not the builder. So with all these GPUs being routed through one location that's in a geopolitically sensitive location like Taiwan, you got to wonder, right?
Yeah, we mentioned that as well here in the strategic macro risks. Sorry, we were running out of time towards the end, so we didn't mention specifics.
Okay,
but yeah, so geopolitical risk definitely could affect our supply chains. So we've been considering that as well, and also then just trying to procure as early as possible.
Yep. You talked about, I think you were talking about turbines in terms of like the lead time and the risks associated. Colossus One was using used turbines from a European location.
Mm-hmm.
So the only risk was shipping it from one location to another. Here you've got all of the procurement and delays that could come from them.
And interestingly, XAI has partnered with Solaris and a company called Stateland or State. That they have a joint venture now going where they, instead of leasing the turbines from Solaris, which is an energy company, now Elon Musk has proposed a joint venture with Solaris to have partial ownership of the turbines. So he doesn't just have to rent them, he can be an owner of these turbines.
So power is coming from Mississippi.
Yeah.
Compute is coming from Tennessee.
Yes.
But these are in relatively close proximity to each other.
Very close. They're
But
across
the
the board.
regulatory, they're totally different regulations.
Exactly. So we had to consider the regulations on all of those. So the construction ones are quite similar because large scale data center versus a turbine field have quite similar like stormwater runoff regulations. But when you consider the air regulations, it's a little bit more lenient in Mississippi, and that's why he decided to put the turbines across.
Well, plus they had a vacant site that had already been a power site before. So all the lines were there in terms of distribution. And so everything was there. It was just, it was decommissioned and he's recommissioning. That's my understanding. So classes 2 actually makes a lot more sense than classes 1. I think most of the risks from classes 1 have been mitigated in class. But correct me if I'm wrong. That's
Yeah.
You learned a lot from classes 1, especially what not to do.
The way that he's doing it, some estimates are saying that they're going to be done earlier than us. But to get to that area, you would have to skip over some regulations. So we took that into account and decided to extend the time for the project a little bit longer so that we would have time to be completely compliant with all the regulations. But I think he's learned his lesson to some extent, and he's not trying to say that these aren't large scale polluting turbines, but I guess we'll see what happens in the next couple of years.
Any other thoughts? This is highly political and very controversial. At least classes 1 became that. I don't know about classes 2 quite yet. It's amazing that Memphis approved it, given all the controversy with classes 1.
It's right next to residential areas.
Oh. Shapur, any thoughts?
Oh, this is, and I think you guys did a good job. So obviously, a lot more focused on the financial side of it, the business side of it, looking at it. So one of the things on the risk, you might want to think about it. You assume the cost is pretty much fixed. You know how much it's going to cost doing that, but the revenue is dependent on basically all the future business. So what if you don't get the revenue? What kind of rate of return you're going to have, and what kind of profitability you're going to have? So what if there's NVIDIA comes up with another, chip that is much better, much faster, much so that's one of the things that many of the data centers kind of thinking about it, because that's a huge investment, and how to ensure to keep it up to date and get the customers loaded in the system to be able to do that. So that's something you might want to think about that.
Yes. All right. Any other comments or questions? I thought you guys did a great job. I mean, the numbers here are so compelling that you can see why it attracts so much capital. And it's not just this project, but every project like it. All these analyses have shown a very compelling business case, right? And I think this is why there's a risk of overcounting and double counting. The revenue that you're counting on is the same revenue that MS, or Stargate was counting on. So as a result, we have this potential, hey Tom, for this huge risk bubble. And that's what we're talking about now, is the risk bubble behind it, right?
By the way, we want them to build more of them because we sell more products. That's okay.
Spoken like a CEO. So as long as the bubble keeps expanding, right, Shapur?
Yeah, I like those bubbles. Keep going.
All right, the bubble chasers that we are. So thank you all. Nice job. Well done.
Hey, Mark, I gotta drop off.
We're gonna be.
Mark, I gotta drop off right now. Is it okay?
Okay, thank you, Shapur. We appreciate your time tonight.
Oh, thank you.
And your comments.
Thank you.
Take care. All right, we got one more project before we go to the AMGEN stuff. 3 Mile Island Power Plant. You guys want to get up there? Team 4. We had a CEO from a power supply company that he was giving us a lot of feedback. He just went through 3 hyperscale data centers. One is going to be similar in terms of the recommissioning the 3 Mile Island power plant for a data center. Okay, and that's what this project for something else. So I think you'll like it. They had two reactors that, I think this reactor one did not melt out. So this is the one that we hear. You guys okay?
Yeah.
You look worried. You got that worried look on your face.
Do you guys want me to present or are you plugging in the computer?
Overtime?
Say it again, Sarah.
Oh, I'm on their team, so I was just asking if they want me to present or if they're plugging in someone's computer.
Oh, yeah. Can you share it? Can you share it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Too much technology.
Okay. Okay, does everything look fine?
Yeah, looking good. Take it away, guys. You got 10 minutes.
Okay, I could start. So we're presenting on the restart of the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant in Pennsylvania. My name is Sarah.
I'm Jet. I'm Brian. I'm Kunal. I'm Dylan.
Okay. And then to give a quick overview on the power plant, recently there's been a big rise in the need for nuclear power, specifically because it does provide that 24/7 electricity that is highly demanded. It also has a carbon-free baseload power, and it's completely weather independent. So with the rise of AI as of late and the need for data centers, a nuclear plant does fill that need. For the TMI-1, it's a pressurized water reactor that was running in the past, but it shut down in 2019 for purely economic reasons. It is a completely safe plant. So it's rebranded. It's been rebranded as the Crane Clean Energy Center. It's been signed on by Microsoft in a 20-year PPA. So it has good project economics, which we'll talk about later. And a big point of reference that we used throughout this project was the Palisades. It's the only active US example of restarting a decommissioned plant. It's in Michigan, and it helps provide a regulatory and technical blueprint for our project. And it shows that the project is feasible and it is possible within the 4-year time frame that we have.
Yeah. 3 Mile Island has to pass through a lot of regulatory hurdles through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in order to be recommissioned. Two key vulnerabilities we've identified due to the accident history of 3 Mile Island are first the license amendment request, which has to do with things like emergency planning, approval for equipment upgrades, which we think will be under closer scrutiny due to the accident history of 3 Mile Island. Each of these delays could cause supplemental reviews that could go up to 3 to 9 months. The other source of vulnerability we found in this regulatory process is the public comment period. Again, due to the accident history, the public might be likelier to file petitions. And the key part of these petitions are that even if they're like bad or unsuccessful, we still have to refute them in order to continue building, which could trigger up to 2 to 12 months of further formal meetings and review. On the next slide, we'll see the timeline. And our timeline is largely determined by the regulatory hurdles we identified. Since 3 Mile Island is a decommissioned plant, all of the infrastructure is mostly there with a few upgrades that are necessary. So our timeline is largely determined by a lot of these license renewal applications that we'll submit. So in 2019, the plant was finally shut down, but in 2024, there was the announcement of the recommissioning as well as some submissions of the initial license amendment request in early 2025. In 2026, we aim to get a key regulatory hurdle passed, which is the NRC environmental assessment, which could cause a delay of up to a year if not passed, because it could trigger supplementary reviews on the carbon intensity of the power plant. And in 2027, we want to pretty much finish the rest of the regulatory hurdles that we talked about in the previous slide, the license amendment request, and also the public comment period, and return to operational status by early 2020.
And you just saw the high level timeline that we have. This Gantt chart shows how everything works behind that timeline. So how that work is sequenced and coordinated over the 4-year schedule of the project. The relationships matter more than the nitty-gritty dates, since they show which tasks run in parallel, which depend on the NRC approvals, and which sit on the critical path. You could see that some tasks, like the NRC environmental assessment, are the long lead drivers, and other tasks are built around these regulatory durations. You could see how some tasks are overlapped to compress the schedule and keep the reopening to be on the target year 2028. And this slide just really illustrates the complexity and the coordination of the work. Yeah.
In order to analyze this project from a financial perspective, we looked at similar projects or other papers that have figures published on some costs that we can use in our analysis. We did this over a 30-year lifespan, 4 years for the refurbishment, and it's planned to open in early 2028 and operating all the way through until 2054. So this already has a total capital investment announced to be $1.6 billion. 1 billion of that being a loan from the Department of Energy, and the rest backed by corporate PPA through Microsoft. And through that $1.6 billion, we broke it down into hard costs and soft costs. And some things that I want to mention here are, for example, the contingency fund, which is something that we modeled after the Crystal River project in 2009, and then accounting for the inflation since then, and using those figures to help us better construct up to that total capital investment of $1.6 billion. And in the next slide, we also made some key assumptions in order to perform the discounted cash flow model analysis. So the nice thing about this one is that we are backed by corporate PPA. So there is a fixed revenue rate of $98 per megawatt hour. And at the same time, we have some figures from the Department of Energy showing the general capacity factors of nuclear power plants in the past decade or so at 92.5%. And using that, we also have figures for O&M costs as well as an assumed discount rate that is a little lower than some of the previous presentations because we have been de-risked by that corporate-backed PPA. And with that, we got to the figures of an annual projection for $663 million in revenue, as well as a net operating profit of $381.5 million. And this accounts for the O&M costs. And that brings us to an NPV of $1.43 billion and an IRR of 13.7%, which beats the discount rate of 8% previously assumed.
For risk management itself, we had 5 different factors that we considered. We classified all of them as either high or medium, because if this was low, I don't think we had this whole thing in the first place. So for firstly, we considered age-related component failures. And our project is following closely towards the Palisades plant. And in the Palisades plant itself, it was found that there were many faulty tubings in the steam turbine. So this would be a consideration for the Constellation for the 3 Mile Island project itself. But given the experience that Constellation has, this shouldn't be an issue with the inspection and repair and overall of any component that is required. Next would be the NRC regulatory delays. So for Palisades itself, there were many folk documentations implemented, documentation and procedures implemented. So again, Constellation can leverage on these learnings and improvise accordingly, as well as maintain a dedicated expert regulatory affairs team to handle these issues. Folk is first of a kind documentations. And third would be legal challenge by oppositions. So for Palisades itself, there was a group called Beyond Nuclear. They had launched many legal challenges against Palisades, but failed for all of them. So again, for this, Constellation can study the legal precedents and prepare the defenses for challenges before the ASLB. ASLB is Atomic Safety and Licensing Board. In the next slide, we have capital cost overruns. So currently there's a 20-year fixed PPA, which provides revenue at certainty. And given the new $1 billion DOE funding, this also provides financial security in case there's cost overruns, and this would reduce the chances of this whole project failing. Lastly would be the negative public opinion. For Palisades itself, roughly 60% of the residents residing near the plant itself were against the reopening of this facility. So likewise, there will be definitely a lot of negative public pressure against the reopening. But first thing that was done for 3 Mile Island was the rebranding towards Green Clean Energy Center to remove the opinion of this past incident. And yes, there was targeted community outreach and investments and emphasis on economic benefits, which does help to mitigate this issue.
There's several updates and requirements that the infrastructure needs to meet. First of all, it's structural and seismic readiness for to meet the current NRC seismic and structural standards. And there needs to be a refurbishment of cooling towers and transformers, as well as review for insulation aging, oil degradation for mechanical and electrical modernization, and control, instrumentation and cyber upgrades, because there are cyber secure networks to meet post-2010 cybersecurity. operational requirements. And for the auxiliary and administrative facilities, needs to update emergency feed water pumps, diesel generators, rad water systems, rad waste systems, support buildings, and different facilities to meet the current staffing, monitoring, and installation needs. And for cooling and service water systems, it needs to ensure reliability of river supply drinking water, and needs to enhance safety and security upgrades for physical security barriers and different IT systems. And overall, the ownership of the site and layout is owned by Constellation for Unit 1 and Energy Solutions for Unit 2. But most of the several auxiliary systems, access roads, and emergency planning components are shared. And the layout includes reactor and containment areas, turbine generator complex, cooling tower zone, etc. For the reconstruction scale and implications, original construction involved massive integrated structures up to 190,000 cubic yards of concrete and 24,000 tons of steel and 740 miles of wiring. And scope illustrates the depth of inspections and modernization required for a restart.
You just speed it up.
Yeah, our final verdict is to proceed with the project because we concluded that the financial certainty is secured with 20-year fixed price PPA with Microsoft, operational expertise led by Constellation Energy, which is the largest and the most experienced nuclear operator in the United States. And the market demand is sufficient, and they've got to be running the systems 24/7. And the precedent and infrastructure leverages billions of dollars of existing functional infrastructure, so it's very capital efficient than building new plants, and it benefits from the regulatory and technical precedent led by the precedents. Thank you very much.
All right, nice job. So this project, unlike the others that took 2 or 2.5 years, this is taking a full 4 years. And yet it's recommissioning a plant that's already there.
Yeah.
And I guess you would think it would be functional, but they have to literally inspect every pipe and every well.
Yeah, it's probably because it's going to be under like closer scrutiny again because of the previous accident. So they're anticipating that it's like harder to get approvals for like rebuilding the plant and getting all the upgrades done. So I think that's the cause of the delays most.
So Constellation signs a 4-year PPA, right? So who's on the hook here if they don't, if this plant doesn't come up online on schedule? Isn't it Constellation's problem in terms of the risk?
Microsoft is very it's probably PPA that they signed with.
Yeah, but the supplier is taking any risk, not the customer, right? Microsoft's the customer, the recipient, right? And if Constellation says, oh, we can't get 3 Mile Island up and running, they still signed a PPA, they still have to deliver, don't they? It would seem to me like, Constellation's a big energy company. They can provide energy through other means until they get 3 Mile Island up and running. So I guess that's where I'm coming from here. Most of these risks seem to be on Constellation. The fact that they signed a PPA on something as risky as a 4-year recommissioning of an existing nuclear power plant, it seems odd, but I think from a Microsoft perspective, it's fantastic, right? Because it's low risk from their perspective. Do you feel like they traded low risk from a Microsoft perspective? They traded low risk for longer schedule?
I think we were looking at it mostly from like an upfront investment perspective, where by signing that fixed price PPA and getting the backing of Department of Energy, they're able to fund all of the necessary costs that go into energy regulatory and things like that. And we kind of viewed risks through that perspective. But now that you bring up the fact that even if they don't deliver on this 4-year plan, they still have to provide all that energy for
signed the PPA. I mean, it's a power purchase agreement. What can they do, right?
So they do have to provide in that scope too. So that was something that we definitely should consider.
So the other thing is Gates, as you know, is very much into small modular reactors. He wants to see a reinvigoration of the nuclear industry. Do you think it's a coincidence here that he wants nuclear? If this happens to be nuclear, this is Microsoft. I mean, it all seems to weave together in a kind of a conspiratorial way, right? I mean, it just seems like he gets his SMRs in one way or the other. Palisades was the groundbreaker, right? Kind of the icebreaker. But now, if you layer Palisades on with this one here, 3 Mile Island, it opens the door for all sorts of nuclear projects, right? And frankly, most people think nuclear is the way out of this dilemma that we have, where the demand is quickly going to exceed our supply of energy. By the way, this is a great research project for any of you, right? Including you, right? In terms of when will we run out of energy at the rate we're building all these data centers? The biggest risk, I think, across the board is the energy side. All right, any other questions for this team? All right, nice job, though. Well done. All right, let's pivot now to the AMGEN teams. We have IMDELTRA 1, or Team 1, I guess, IMDELTRA. You guys want to come up? By the way, I want to introduce Tom Zarol. Tom Zarol comes to us from AMGEN. He's been with them a long time. Before AMGEN, he was with Horizon Therapeutics, which was acquired by AMGEN. And actually, this is his area of expertise, right? This particular
IMDELTRA is in oncology, which is
Okay.
a really special project to me. But the Maritide team, I'm on the leadership team for Maritide right now. So I think you guys are going next.
Yeah, you're going next. Okay. All right, take it away. Be able to share. A lot of great opportunities in the pharma space, guys. They're always hiring.
We just hired somebody from
one of my last classes, right?
in India.
In India. He went to Hyderabad to hire them. So there you go. Take it away.
Grady, good evening, everyone. We are Team 10, and we'll be talking about IMDELTRA today, which is currently being developed by AMGEN. So first, we're going to get into a little bit of background about the drug itself. It's a biologic-based drug, and it works by targeting tumors for degradation via T-cell activation. And the way that it does this is that IMDELTRA itself is a molecule that's made up of an anti-DLL3 domain with an anti-CD3 bispecific T-cell engager, and it creates a synapse in between the two cells, activates the T-cell, and then sends signals that cause for degradation of the tumor cell. And it's selective to the tumor cells because they express a DLL3 protein, and so there's little residual effects on other healthy cells. So the two main indications of IMDELTRA are small cell lung cancer and neuroendocrine prostate cancer. And it's administered via IV in a healthcare setting with increasing dosages with every administration. So next we'll get into market analysis. As I mentioned, the two main indications of IMDELTRA that are being developed are SCLC, small cell lung cancer, and NEPC, neuroendocrine prostate cancer. But currently SCLC is the main focus as it's further in development and also has a larger market. So for SCLC, what we have to consider is that about 15% of all lung cancer diagnoses present as SCLC, and then about 86% of those relapse after first-line treatment, which then makes them eligible for treatment with IMDELTRA. And so that means that there's about 29,000 newly eligible patients for IMDELTRA every year. And then if we look at NEPC, we have to realize that only about 1% of prostate cancer diagnoses present primarily as NEPC, but about 17% of advanced metastatic prostate cancer cases can become NEPC. So that gives us about 8,500 potentially eligible patients per year in the US. And so then if we shift into a competitive analysis, AMGEN's IMDELTRA has two main competitors at the moment. The first is paluntamig, being developed by Phanes Therapeutics. And paluntamig is a direct competitor for both SCLC and NEPC. And it uses a similar mechanism as IMDELTRA, but it uses a different T-cell engager. And then the second is FPI 2059, which is being produced by Fusion Therapeutics or Pharmaceuticals, which is now being acquired by AstraZeneca. And that's a direct competitor for SCLC and uses a different mechanism where it binds to a different protein on the tumor cells.
Moving to timeline analysis, the key story here is about speed. IMDELTRA moved from the discovery to FDA approval in just 7 years, which is far faster than the industry's usual speed, like 10 to 12 years. And this was possible because AMGEN leveraged its validated HLE BITE platform, allowing the program to skip many early-stage uncertainties. We secured FDA accelerated approval in May 2024, but right now the project sits at a critical regulatory pivot point. This approval is conditional, and our biggest priority and also the biggest risk is the post-marketing requirement. We must convert accelerated to for approval to secure the market, and we must deliver the complementary phase 3 Delphi Sphere 4 results by 2026. On-time completion is the only test to the for approval and long-term stability in the market. Looking forward, the timeline shows a very strong defensive mode. Orphan drug exclusivity protects us through 2031, and as a biologic, Imdelltra has data exclusivity until 2036. That means no biosimilarities can rely on AMGEN's data for the next 12 years, giving the drug a clean, protected revenue runway. Our strategy for this protect window is aggressive life cycle expansion. We are not relying on the accelerated approval alone. We are pushing trials like 03 to move into earlier line SCLC treatment and pursuing new indications such as NEPC. So in summary, we built it fast in 7 years. We are securing it now, and we are expanding it for the next decade.
Moving into a cost analysis, looking at one of the first costs, this would be the cost to develop the drug. Since no specific information has been posted from the preclinical and clinical trial testing, we used industry data to kind of estimate this values using 2 different studies, Prasad et al. And Damasi et al., both of which take separate approaches. The first study uses a bottom-up approach where it uses the amount of people in a clinical trial and scales up from there based on the cost, the number of people, the length of the trial, etc. And then the second uses a top-down approach based on self-reported data from companies in the drug development process. And this gets us a combined estimate averaging these two out about $1.9 billion with a pretty wide range. And since this is an oncology drug, it typically would be more than that or on the higher end of that range by nature of the preclinical and clinical testing used to verify this drug. Second, we can look at post-market costs such as manufacturing, distribution, and commercialization based on the published AMGEN report of cost of sales. They reported the Q4 sales for Imdelltra to be about $67 million. And then using the GAAP and non-GAAP costs, which estimated to be about 18 to 40% of the product sales is what makes up the post-market costs. We can scale that to get a midpoint estimate quarterly of about $19.5 million and annually of about $78 million. And then revenue generation mainly will depend on the price of the Imdelltra, the drug, the duration of the treatment, and the number of patients being treated. And so through this estimate, the price is typically about $31,500 for the first round of treatment, and then the next subsequent cycles moving down to $30,000. And the typical treatment is projected to be about 5 months, give or take, depending on how well the patient takes the treatment. And using that, the cost per patient can be estimated to be about $66,500. And then scaling that to yearly revenue based on the patient population, that gets you a pretty wide range of about $138 to $369 million, bringing in. And then it is just important to note that with these cost calculations, there is a lot of assumptions and limitations being made by nature of the uncertainty and how drug development differs for each specific drug. For example, some of these studies were done in the past, and therefore inflation was not accounted for, and also we're making a lot of assumptions about the length of treatment, the cost of treatment, the market trajectory.
So then moving on to some of the risks. First being phase latency or your phase transition rate is pretty common with drug development here though. But since Imdelltra is pretty far developed for small cell lung cancer, we see this as like a smaller risk. But to mitigate this, you would want to make sure that your trials are being completed on time and making sure you're gathering data as soon as you can. And then the next one we have is clinical expansion. I think AMGEN is currently doing a phase 1B combination study for Imdelltra, basically using Imdelltra with other drugs.
The risk here is if they get a negative or neutral result, in which case then they can't expand it to combination, as well as if they were going to try being being a first in line drug and they fail at that too, then they're really limiting who they can treat with Imdelltra. So to mitigate that, you want to do extensive trial design and use interim analysis to make quicker go or no go decisions there. And then the next risk is manufacturing. I think currently they're manufacturing the drug, the solution stabilizer, and then doing the packaging and labeling in 3 separate places. I think they're all in 3 different countries as well. So the risk there is logistics and transportation, as well as some of the safety risks and scaling up their drug right now. So to mitigate that, I believe AMGEN has, or they're in the process of creating new biomanufacturing plants in Ohio and Rhode Island in the US. So expanding the manufacturing to those plants as well can help, including building buffer inventory at each site so that if something does go wrong in transportation, they don't have to stop right away. They can their manufacturing, as well as doing safety testing as they scale up production. And then another one of their main concerns would be the FDA accelerated approval. As we mentioned earlier, they're trying to move from that accelerated approval to full market approval. And to do that, they have to finish up their clinical trials and prove their clinical benefits with Imdelltra. So the risk here is if they don't get that done in time, or if those trials fail to prove those benefits, they would have to go back to the traditional timeline, causing longer delays. And then lastly is the competition. There are 3 main categories Imdelltra would be competing in. One is other drugs that treat small cell lung cancer, but Imdelltra, through their initial trials, proved to be a little bit better, have better benefits for the patients. So there's not too much concern there. The next would be first in line chemo drugs. So since Imdelltra is not first in line right now, they're relying on their patients to have some sort of treatment and then still need more in order to get Imdelltra. And then the third category is other DLL3 targeting drugs, but most of those are still in their earlier phases, so that's also less concern.
After reviewing the timeline, the market landscape, and the risk analysis, our recommendation is clear. AMGEN should move forward with Imdelltra. Clinically, it fills a major unmet need in SCLC. The drug already has accelerated approval, and we are on track for full approval. Commercially, Imdelltra is projected through 2036, giving AMGEN a long and defensible revenue runway. Pricing power and expansion of opportunities of NEPC and other DAR3 positive tumors further strengthen the commercial cases. And strategically, the drug creates value beyond sales. It validates AMGEN's HLE BITE platform and reduces risk for the entire specific pipeline, reinforcing the company's position in oncology innovation. Because then Imdelltra is already approved and generating revenue. Our exist strategy shifts from divestment to value maximization. Options like M&A and or spin outs don't fit. The assert is too strategic, and selling now would give up long-term platform value. A late strategy divestiture is possible in 2030s, but not relevant today. So the optimal strategy is to retain the assert and position it as a cash cow. AMGEN is best positioned to capture its full value through lifecycle expansion, new indications, and the global growth. So in summary, Imdelltra is both clinically meaningful and strategically valuable. Our recommendation is a confident goal with retention as a core strategy. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. So to explain orphan drug exclusivity, what does that mean? When does it expire? Talk about orphan drug exclusivity. I think somewhere around slide 3 or slide 4. Does that mean you have protection from other competitors as an orphan drug?
I think it's kind of more. It's been 7 years. from the accelerated approval, which is 2024. So it's protected 31, and in this stage, other companies can't use. AMGEN will not share the data about his drugs to the public. I think so the competition.
You can block competition.
Yes.
When does the patent expire?
The
patent on the drug?
Oh, it will expire at 2036, I believe. But I didn't find very official announcement about this part.
Is it 2036? Got it, okay. I liked your estimation approach. You talked about top down versus bottom up. I like the fact that you laid out your assumptions, which was great. You also talked about how you can adjust the trial design to meet specific risks, I guess. But then you left it kind of short there, so I'm kind of curious what that means. How do you design the trial to manage risk?
I think it depends on what you're looking for. So, like I mentioned, like if they're doing expansion trials, you want to be really specific about who the patients are. So, like in terms of a combination trial, that might be defining the patients, but also like which drugs they're using it with, and then just like safety monitoring. Because I believe if you go into Deltra, like if you search it up, they have a website. They have a lot of like safety.
Great questions. So first off, fantastic job. I mean, I can't even fathom speaking how you guys are speaking in the pharmaceutical industry when I was in university 30 years ago. Great job. This product is an amazing product, and I don't mean to be a walking commercial for the company right now. I've worked in the industry for 25 years, and this is the least risky product I've ever worked for. And the main reason why is that how much this product does for the current standard of care for patients that are living with small cell lung cancer. It is a devastating disease that there are really no other options for. And this drug ultimately has demonstrated in its initial trials that it substantially advances or lengthens a person's life that's lived with this disease. Our biggest risk with this patient population, with this drug, is actually in the fact that there's just smaller patient populations. It's not its safety profile. It's also not competition. There's a lot of competitors right now while they're investigating this drug or drugs in the space. They're failing. These trials are failing. And so these smaller patient populations is where this is a risk because of current pressure on price based on the current administration's drive on reducing drug prices in the US. And that would impact your model to go forward. But you guys came to the correct conclusion here. There's no chance that any responsible professional that's leading in the pharmaceutical industry is not going to move this drug forward based on how much this has improved the standard of care. And that also impacts pricing as well too. How much you can get for a drug really depends on how much advanced the drug has, how much advancement to the current standard of care, the current treatments offer to patients living with the disease, along with how serious the disease is too. And this is a terminal disease. So the fact that we've demonstrated substantial advancement to the current standard of care for a deadly disease is where we're getting high prices for this drug right now.
And I noticed the $65,000 for the treatment.
165 for full 5 months worth of treatment.
160.
Yeah.
And yet you're going to add more costs by moving manufacturing into the US. Right?
They can, because I think when I was doing the research, they have like they're doing it across countries, so it'd be better to do it in the US. And I think AMGEN has press release articles on new sites in Ohio and Rhode Island. So they would have to get like the FDA approval.
So it kind of reduces the logistics risk, but the flip side is it does add cost, and we're already in a kind of a expensive realm right here. I mean, the small population, you have to divide your $1 billion plus development into smaller populations. So that makes sense, but politically it sounds horrible, right? I mean, do you want President of the United States saying, why is it costing so much, or why are you charging so much for a treatment for something that is, this valuable? I mean, the value seems to be there. It's clearly an incremental a huge incremental step here, but I guess, how did you come up with the pricing? Or was it something that AMGEN just has already decided? Yeah, so it's already published, it's out there, okay, all right. All right, any other questions? An exciting world, don't you think? All the risks, all the opportunities, so nice job, well done. All right, Maritide is next, team 2. Then we'll close with the Mexico Interoceanic Corridor after that. That's gonna be exciting.
We have 2 here and we have 2 further here using the Zoom.
I'm gonna check their audio, make sure it works.
Hello, is it working?
Yep, we can hear you.
Hello?
We got you. All right, group 2, you've got a captive audience here, right? So take it away, 10 minutes.
So we had Maritide by AMGEN, and just to dive a little bit into the background of this drug, it is previously known as AMG 133, and it is a peptide antibody conjugate under development primarily for obesity and type 2 diabetes, but specifically for weight loss. So we know that obesity remains a global crisis, and just to put this in a bit of perspective, 43% of adults aged 18 years and over were overweight, and 16% were living with obesity in 2022. So AMGEN aims to address this need through Maritide. And just to dive into how this drug works, it basically is blocking or inhibiting one metabolic pathway, GIPR, and activating another one, GLP-1. So these are 2 hormones that are secreted by the gut after eating, and they trigger insulin secretion as well as playing a big role in appetite regulation. Additionally, this drug is delivered monthly through a subcutaneous injection. So to dive into the timeline of Maritide, it is currently in phase 3 clinical trials for obesity and type 2 diabetes. It seeks FDA approval through a BLA, which is Biologics License Application. And to help further determine our timeline analysis, we heavily relied on the DD09 bio numbers report. Basically, this is a report that has summarized past drug delivery products to come up with parameters and an average timeline of drug delivery products. So from this report, they state that products that require a safety trial or clinical trials take about 6.2 years on average, and based on the parameters listed in the table. However, the report also acknowledges that some parameters may have more weight. So we use their algorithm worksheet to further capture an estimated timeline of 8.7 years. This is greater than the 6.2 years because it takes into account that Maritide is a macromolecule. It is a conjugate making it a bigger molecule, which therefore just implies a longer development time. As well as this is a novel mechanism. It has not, the mechanism that it is reducing weight, it has not been FDA approved previously through other drugs. So that is why the overall approval and development time has jumped to 8.7. So we have estimated for the development and approval time to be expected in late 2030.
Moving on to FDA regulations and strategy, as Tiffany mentioned, Maritide will require filing a BLA. So for trial design, we suggest aligning directly with FDA's draft guidance for obesity and overweight products. That includes using recommended efficacy endpoints such as percentage weight reduction and relevant cardiometabolic markers. It also requires ensuring a treatment duration of at least 1 year, including lifestyle modifications, and making sure to sample underrepresented patient populations so that the data reflects real-world diversity. On the safety side, long-term monitoring is essential. Have to follow the FDA's expectations for metabolic, cardiovascular, and gastrointestinal safety throughout development, since these are key areas of concern in obesity therapeutics. So overall, the goal is to build a program that is tightly aligned with FDA expectations from the very beginning, reducing regulatory risk and increasing the probability of successful BLA approval.
We based the cost analysis on the DD09 document data, adjusted upwards to accommodate obesity trials that are longer and larger than the regular biologic medication. The main cost driver is phase 3, with the predicted cost of $450 million. CMC development and PDQ, which cover the scaling up of manufacturing, and the FDA check on batch consistency, are predicted to cost about $200 million. And the BLA, which is the regulatory process, is supposed to cost to have a smaller cost of around $35 million because it's mainly regulatory documentation. And altogether, the development cost from this point onwards is predicted to be $685 million in the base case.
Moving on to market analysis. As mentioned before, Maritide focuses on people who are suffering from obesity. And as you can see on the chart on the right, top right, obesity is just growing over the years all over the world. And on the chart on the bottom right, we can observe that the market for obesity treatment, it's really promising, and it's expected that to reach a value of $60.5 billion in the year of 2030. So, and that happens because there's a future projection that 60% of the world population may be obese by 2050 by researchers.
Yeah, so America is entering one of the most competitive and rapidly growing markets in pharma. The landscape today is dominated by Novo Nordisk with Ozempic and Wegovy, and Eli Lilly with Mounjaro and Zepbound. These GLP-1 based therapies have completely reshaped obesity and diabetes care. Their strong clinical efficacy has led to massive commercial success. In 2024 alone, Ozempic generated about $13 billion dollars and Wegovy about $7 billion in sales. The rest can be seen in the chart in the top right. But the existing standard of care already delivers substantial weight loss efficacy. So Maritime must show clear differentiation, whether that's through superior efficacy, better durability, improved cardiometabolic improvements, or greater convenience.
So as we can see on the table below on the corner, right corner, we're comparing Maritide with all the other drugs that are currently in the market, as mentioned by Julie. So the first major differentiating would be the dosing frequency. While Ozempic and Mounjaro require once a week injections, Maritide is going to focus on a once a month dosage, and which will certainly be more convenient for patients and improve long-term adherence. When we look at weight plateau, phase 2 data showed that there's no plateau at 52 weeks for Maritide, which it could happen for both Ozempic and Mounjaro. And also related to this, Mounjaro showed a lower likelihood of weight regain after the treatment ends, which is a major challenge when using GLP as a therapy. Also, even though Maritide is currently in phase 3 trials and its competitors are already approved, the strength of the phase 2 and early phase 3 results has positioned it as a potential best-in-class therapy, which this will certainly reduce the risks in the competitive environment.
Our revenue model is based on assumptions from today's available GLP-1 market data of 20 million eligible patients in the US, with actual adoption rate of between 8 to 15%. When looking on competitors such as Ozempic and Mounjaro, entrants can capture about 3 to 10% of market share with a $6,000 net price per year after rebates. Using the formula, we modeled 3 different scenarios. According to typical 3 years pattern, ramp-up pattern of other GLP launches in recent years, like Ozempic and Mounjaro. This is the growth of the revenue in the first 3 years. And the main takeaway we took from this is even in the conservative assumptions, by year 3, we're going to reach a revenue of $520 million. That is almost the developing cost we have left right now. The probability of commercial success, PTRS, which is the chance that the drug will actually reach the market and will be approved in all phases. we multiplied all transition phase probabilities and we got a 29% approval. Most of it already passed because phase 1 and 2 are already passed, and the diabetes and the obesity is already in phase 3 right now. So there's a high probability of success to reach the market itself. But even though the GLP-1 is already have a validated mechanism that like other drugs went through, there are still a few risks, clinical, regulatory, commercial, and operative that we will elaborate on right now.
Moving on to the risk analysis, I'll be talking specifically about the clinical risk. So, Maritide faces several key risks as it advances through phase 3. Clinically, GI tolerability remains the biggest concern, with phase 1 showing dose-related nausea and vomiting rates above 20%. These issues can drive higher dropout rates and force dose escalation adjustments in larger trials. Then regulatory uncertainty is also significant. Even with strong phase 2 efficacy, the FDA may require larger samples and longer follow-up, added cardiovascular heart failure safety cohorts to confirm durability. And finally, there are operational risks, including enrollment and retention challenges and external disruptions like outbreaks or economic instability. That phase 3 cardiovascular trials are long and complex, and different subgroups may reveal new safety signals, creating potential delays in approval.
Next sets of risk are operational and commercial. On the CMC side, CMC development, biological and maritide are sensitive to batch inconsistency and stability issues. So that might postpone and require more PPQ as well. It can require more investigation to the product, which can push timelines by several months and even more. But the highest severity risk is the competitors in the GLP market. The market is dominated by Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly with very efficient products. So any new entrant will face heavy competitive pressure. And in addition, I will mention the market access, which remains a barrier. The US insurances sometimes, most of the times, don't cover for obesity medication, but mostly for diabetes medication. So that can lead to a slow uptake, even if regardless of the efficiency of the drug itself.
Here are some exit options to take into account all the risks. So we thought that out licensing, co-development, asset sale, and pausing the project would be some good options for AMGEN. However, all of them have pros and cons. So for example, out licensing would certainly risk share with the partner and cash and get upfront cash payments. However, they lose control over the Maritide project and dependence on partner. For the co-development, they will certainly share all the costs and will mitigate risks related to the project. However, they will have a slower decision making and profit sharing. They could also just sell Maritide to another company, which would get them immediate cash and no future risks. However, they could lose all the future upside and profits. And also, they could just pause the project, which could bring cost reduction and could reallocate all the resources that are currently being used into other projects. And however, they will lose momentum in case if they want to come back to the market and will bring an uncertain restart. So taking all that into account, we suggest that we think that AMGEN should move forward with the Maritide developments, even though we have all the risks.
Nice job. Well done. What a surprising recommendation. After all those negatives, right? I mean, actually, there were hardly any negatives. The positives, on the other hand, I mean, it is going to be difficult to overtake Ozempic, don't you think? What market share does Ozempic have now? Because you're targeting something like 6% in the nominal case market share. I thought Ozempic was more than double that, right? As a competitor? Yeah.
Most competitive. From what I read in the research, it have like between 5 to 12% of the market share when they stabilize. I'm not sure about Ozempic.
I mean, it's probably one of the most recognized, GLP drugs out there, right? So, is there a controversy about reimbursement for GLP drugs and obviously for diabetics, type 2 diabetics, I would assume there's no problem getting reimbursed. But how about pre-diabetics? People that have, those sorts of issues that have not actually manifested as diabetes. I mean, what is the market here for this?
We decided to focus mainly on the obesity because we found the most data on this, and we from what we read, the medication mostly focuses on obesity is like the biggest market share, and the most common thing.
We can get reimbursed just for obesity alone. I mean, I assume this is an expensive drug, right? Even with the monthly versus bi-weekly applications. So I assume that reimbursement is key to the success, right? Insurance companies, Medicare, Medicaid.
The $6,000 after rebates, but the actual cost of the drug to the customer is around $12,000 if I'm not wrong. When the middleman we sell it to the insurance companies for $6,000, and then they get the difference.
Okay.
From what I read in other competitors, because I couldn't find specifically the prices for the Meritide.
Probably too early to publish it,
I guess.
Okay. This is your area, man. This is yours.
So we could teach a semester on this.
To
start with.
We got maybe
And
5 or 10 minutes.
To be fair, like a lot of things have developed in the last 2 or 3 weeks on some of the topics that you're talking about from a federal perspective, but there's 5 things that I'll touch on first. And first is competition. And you did a great job too. I'm going to start with that. A fantastic job, not having all the insider information. So you are right, Lilly and Novo are the 2 GLP-1s that are on the market. There are 2 drugs on the market. Of the patient population that qualifies, the billion-dollar patients that you had that number, only 4% billion in the world. In the US, it's still almost 50%. Only 4% of qualifying eligible patients are accessing this drug right now because of plan coverage. More on that in a minute, which you were talking about. So that's one thing with competition. Second thing is, and you mentioned this, you touched on this in your presentation, they are GLP-1s. Meritide is a combination drug, GLP-1 plus a GIPR antagonism as well too. And what that hopefully is going to show to the FDA is better efficacy, so greater weight loss. But then you also touched on 2 really important things too that will hopefully be an advantage to AMGEN. One is dosing. Monthly versus weekly is huge, not just in price, but also in real world evidence as well too, because you'll have more adherence and compliance to a monthly treatment versus a weekly treatment.
Convenience.
Right. So convenience as well too,
Yeah.
huge. The second one, which I think we're even more excited about if this comes true, is weight regain. So the current GLP-1s, it's like 37 days off of the treatment, and they're already starting to gain pretty much all the weight back that they lost. So you have to stay on this drug to keep the weight off. And right now, our early signs are showing that you actually sustain weight loss after you get off of Meritide as well too. Obviously, a huge competitive advantage. So then, I'll touch on plan coverage as well too. And this is what's really evolving based on some negotiations with the current administration and the US government as well too, in terms of like going direct to patients. And so this is another risk, I would say, for our industry too, because the US healthcare system is very complex. You have to go through multiple layers of distribution processes, PBMs, and payers to ultimately get coverage of a drug. And some of the things that are being negotiated with the Trump administration right now is having Lilly, Novo, and AMGEN go directly to patients. So we're starting to build like a direct-to-patient ecosystem right now platform, and it's something we've never done before. And so we got to experiment like just changing the whole game. So that's gonna really change things because most patients are going to be paying out of their own pocket for this drug. They're not going to be going through insurance. And so the whole price thing is really, really uncertain right now, given that there's going to be a huge cash pay component to future GLP-1 and combined GIPRs as well too. The last thing on competition too is, in addition to the current, I'm not even concerned, quite honestly, for Meritide for Lilly and Novo's current drugs. So you're talking about Ozempic? That doesn't concern me. What concerns me is if I look at the actual matrix of all the investigational drugs right now that are being investigated, because you're talking about massive patient populations, a $60 billion market, every single pharmaceutical company in the world is investigating drugs in the space. And while we have a 2-dimension combo drug right now, A lot of drugs that are starting to be developed in phase 1 have 5 different drugs that are coming at this, that are going to be attacking this in a whole different world. And so the real risk for Maritide is actually not the current treatments, it's the follow-on treatments, because the value of this market is so massive. Then the last thing I would say that I would also add to this, and I don't know how much information this is, you can get publicly available. This drug, the way it works, it impacts the brain. Okay, it actually impacts stuff in the brain, and I'm not a scientist. And so the potential for these drugs is to go well beyond type 2 diabetes and chronic weight loss, which is what you were talking about, which can add even more value, because we're looking at investigating this in like substance abuse disorders, Alzheimer's disease, dementia. There's a whole world of new diseases that these GLP-1 treatments and future investigational assets are going to be treated, not to mention all the other health benefits that a patient will get just from reducing their weight as well too. And that's part of like all the work that we're doing right now too.
Close to 200,000 people die in this country every year from alcoholism. So if they can just deal with one substance abuse, that alone would, solve a massive problem for this country. Right?
There's a lot of doctors that are, like this can never be promoted, obviously, but they're starting to prescribe the current approved obesity drugs, the 2 GLP-1s for alcoholism.
Really? Wow.
Just like it's tricking the mind that you're full to reduce weight, it's doing the same thing with substance abuse.
So you're satisfied, you're satiated. Correct. Wow. Wow. You got more than you thought, right?
Thanks for sharing.
Any other comments or questions? So I think GLP drugs, I mean, there's probably no other drug classification that I know of that's been so well discussed, I guess, and so well articulated in the media in just the last few years. So this is both, I guess, an opportunity and a bit of a controversy, especially when it comes to financing such a thing. And then the moral dilemma is, okay, are we financing people who can't control themselves? Should the public bear the cost of a self-induced disease like obesity, right? That's, I guess, some of the question. And that's what is permeating the halls of Congress, for example, right? Or the administration that happens to be in office at the time, right? So different views, different approaches, but I mean, this is clearly, debilitating people. It's reducing our expected lifespan, leading to diabetes, but metabolic syndrome, and even the pre-diabetes. There's how many pre-diabetics are there even before they get to diabetes? It's probably 3-to-1 ratio, right? And just if you can cut it off early, right, and keep them from that slippery slope, it'll have a huge impact. So.
When I joined the pharmaceutical industry a long time ago, a quarter of a century ago, Eli Lilly was not even a top 10 company. Its market capitalization right now is double the next best company. It has just exploded because of these GLP-1s. And I love healthcare because we have purpose and meaning in what we do, right? We're not selling alcohol or things that are harming people, right? We're
addicting.
Right, exactly.
That's okay.
But what's really cool about all these drugs right now is it's really because of the potential and what the cost is going to be, it's causing Congress to reevaluate our entire healthcare system so we can, improve the standard of care for as many people as possible and potentially reduce all these middlemen right now that make our US healthcare system so complex. And so
dysfunctional.
Right.
I mean, we're one of the most expensive countries in the world for healthcare per person, per capita. And at the same time, we have some of the worst outcomes.
Our life expectancy rates are amongst the worst of all developed countries in the world.
And declining.
Right.
So they're getting worse.
Yeah, and that's an objective metric, how old you are when you die.
Here you go.
So,
all right. Well, thank you guys. Nice job. Welcome. Speaking of politics,
is there a third one
on? We had a third one, but that team actually we don't have a team. So
no.
But what we do have is Mexico. So why don't we go to the Mexico team? We'll close with that. A little bit of politics here too, I would say, right? Actually, these days, can you find a project that doesn't have politics? I don't think so. We found a way to politicize everything in our lives, including graduate education. Thanks.
No.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Would you like to?
That would be awesome. Yeah.
They did a fantastic job.
You can take it back to the office and chuckle. That's right. All right, if you're ready, just need to share your screen sometime.
You don't want to join Zoom.
Oh.
Yeah, join the Zoom and share your screen. So the one case we didn't cover was Sydney Opera House. I guess while you're setting up, let me just kind of give you a thumbnail on that. In my mind, Sydney Opera House was a case of missing the estimate because they didn't know what they were estimating. The scope was undefined. If you can have a design, that's wonderful, but if you don't know how to build it, arguably you don't have a design, right? I think they teach this in design thinking, but I mean, it's just like, if you don't know how to build something, you don't really have a design. So being able to link those two things together, it took years. And that's really when the estimate actually had meaning in my mind. So it wasn't so much scope creep as it was just reaching for the stars and not even knowing how to get there. So with that, Mexico, take it away.
Everyone, so we're team 8, and our project was the Interoceanic Corridor in Mexico. I'm Jack.
I'm Devin.
I'm Lucas.
I'm Chuck.
I'm Maya.
Yeah. And before we get started, we just wanted to run through the agenda. For the sake of time, we're just going to show it, but this is what we're going to be covering.
Yeah, so what is the CIIT? So it stands for the Interoceanic Corridor of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. And it's essentially a new trade corridor in southern Mexico, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans at the ports of Santa Cruz and Coatzacoalcos via an upgraded rail line. The goal is to be one of the primary goals is to be an alternative to the Panama Canal, which is facing issues with its primary water source for its levees that support it are drying up, and so it needs to be able to support the stuff that can't go through there right now. It's also another goal is to develop the Mexican South, which is historically one of the poorest and most neglected regions of the country. And we just want to make sure they just want to make sure that they can get the project done in time within budget, and also consider the impact on the environment and the indigenous communities and try and limit that impact.
Yes, so now to look at existing market conditions, these two graphs are demonstrating statistics surrounding container shipping industry. So on the left here, there is a port congestion index, which shows that during COVID times, the congestion in ports globally had increased and then began to recover towards 2023. And then now since 2024 has been trending upwards. And then the graph on the right shows the time spent in ports by container ships. The darker line is in developed countries and the lighter blue line is in developing countries. So it's showing that there's room for improvement in this area. And to briefly mention other competing projects, there are projects in Colombia that have been proposed but not materialized. And there's also another project that China has invested in South America and Peru to develop a similar railway, but that so far is specifically for Chinese companies to utilize. So this is the only feasible project that's been undertaken to serve the market in this way.
And so when it comes to requirements, we grouped it into 4 key pillars. Starting off, a lot of these, or the railway will go through a lot of different town areas, not also a lot of our information on like requirements when it comes to noise and things like that is more on like a per location basis. But on the first main requirement is like identifying key stakeholders within these communities, whether it's leaders or just people who in certain communities can speak both Spanish and whatever the local languages, because some of these communities are pretty cut off from the rest of Mexico. And with that, we wanted to make sure that they had grievance mechanisms in addition to helping to build up these underdeveloped communities through local hiring, using micro suppliers from the area, things like that. Next is environmental, to monitor water use, air quality, ensure that they do not go into protected areas, whether for wildlife or in this area, there are a lot of ruins, whether identified yet or not, but they built mechanisms that if they identify ruins to move around them and not touch them due to Mexican law. In addition, for operational is to make sure that there's enough power so that they are not infringing on the local communities, as well as like there's a lot of construction going on, so they need to do that, as well as integrating all transportation methods to reduce downtime and any delays. And lastly, with financial is to identify who's operating what specific parts, whether ports, railway, industrial parks, as well as the breakdown of national, state, and private investors in actually funding the project.
Yeah, so like a lot of the projects we've talked about today, the CIIT has already started. And there's three major subparts of this project that all have begun work on that are important. So the first is the rail lines, which is kind of the core of the project. Second is the ports. Those actually existed before this project was proposed, but they are being modernized. And then the third is the industrial parks that are along the lines. So far the line Z, which is the core line that connects the two Atlantic and Pacific ports, has been built and is fully operational, but they are looking to build out two lines, K and FA, which just expand a little further into the. So you can kind of think of them as additional investments just for the Mexican South. Next, on the two ports, they're mostly just expanding them. So one of the major issues when the Line Z first opened was that it was only at 50% capacity. And that issue was not because the line itself wasn't working, but rather because the ports had bottlenecks. And those bottlenecks meant that, just simply put, not enough flow could happen from port to port. So they want to expand those ports so that they can take. And then lastly, the industrial parks. So far, 8 out of 10 of them have been contracted. And those parks include things like auto parts, agro, business, a bunch of different things, but they still need to contract. I'll pass it off to Lucas.
Yeah, so just to go over again, just some more of this railroad upgrades that need to be done. In addition to just rehabilitating and upgrading some of the lines, there's a lot of support infrastructure that needs to be built, such as a rail operations hub, more passenger stations, and just more roads, natural gas pipelines, and just other infrastructure. Both ports need to be upgraded. Santa Cruz needs some dredging and a container terminal expansion or to handle the larger loads and more volume. And Costa Cocos needs to increase the depth to accept bigger vessels. The industrial parks that are being built will range from, will have a wide range of industries, and they're just really going to drive lots of economic development via outside investment.
All right, so on Microsoft project, this is our estimated completion date on mid-March of 2033, and this equates to around 1,905 working days. But how did we get here? So there were a lot of assumptions that went into this for a couple of reasons. A lot of the information is just not online. And if it is online, it's in Spanish. And so we worked with a lot of translating, but we pretty much tried to simplify it down to 8 key items from our requirements in the scope, which are this slide up here. So these include program mobilization, rail infrastructure, port upgrades, the industrial parks, so on and so on. Because this project started off in 2018, we made a pretty big simplifying assumption that anything that we don't have access online information to, we've seen that has not started yet. So that is what we did for the basis of our cost build out. This is obviously a pretty big simplification, but we just didn't really have any other way to go about it. So the costs that we do present to you up here are definitely more than what is likely going to be incurred. And then, sorry, so in terms of the critical path, most of the critical items in the or work packages come from subsection 1, 4, and 8. Subsection 4 pertains to the industrial parks, and while these aren't necessarily a part of the railroad and don't affect day-to-day operations, they are very clearly stated in the scope and are a major requirement. And because 2 of those are yet to be contracted, that means that there's no land yet, and none of it has been developed. So those are actually 2 pretty big costs as well that are going to be incurred. Almost not all non-critical tasks have large slack, So the network as a whole is not very sensitive, but there are 14 work packages on the critical path, so those definitely cannot be delayed. And there's lots of laddering, as you can see here. And so obviously from Microsoft project, we get costs that are mainly from laborers. So that means engineers, people that are working on the ground. And we miss out a huge amount of costs, which is actually from purchasing assets, renting machines, purchasing land, and everything you think about when you think about a big, creation or something that you manufacture in like a real. And so to do this, we sort of broke it down into little packages again, just like we did with the Gantt chart. The different sections are up here. We've got rail infrastructure, port upgrades, industrial parks, energy, gas, and shared ops. And this equated to a total of 18 million US dollars. And sorry, this equated to 1.9 billion US dollars. And when we add that to the 18 million from Microsoft projects cost estimates, we get just over $2 billion. And we've multiplied everything here by a factor to account for depreciation, as well as just the time value of money.
Yeah, so for our expected total project cost is approximately $7 billion. So far, around $4 billion is spent from public investment, and another $1 billion from private investment, mainly focused on those industrial parks. There has already been a lot of revenue growth since the first line opened, from $21 million to $260 million today, resulting in our net present value of $2 billion. And all this revenue is primarily coming from rail fees. On top of the revenue, there's lots of economic benefits. 107,000 new jobs have already been created. 2.3 million people have been lifted out of poverty. Projected by 2023, there was going to be 150,000 additional construction jobs. And by 2050, there's projected to be another 550,000 jobs created.
Just touching on the NPV here, we projected our cash flows until 2065, giving us 40 years of operation, and the break even is supposed to happen 10 years down the line. So definitely pretty slow, return to break even, but just based on the other economic benefits that aren't necessarily measured monetarily, we think definitely.
And now to touch on some risks, we came up with 5 key areas: financial, technology, social, political, and environmental, security, and legal risks. So to speak to a few of the major ones, so under financial, we have cost overruns. We think that this should be managed via maintaining the project scope that we had defined earlier, as well as segmenting the project into various stages that we explained, and also looking to attract private investment for any overruns that do occur. Something to note is that the industrial park region is going to be operated as a free trade zone to hopefully attract more indirect investment and also other domestic enterprises to set up shop there. As far as technology, we accounted for the complex geographic terrain that will require highly skilled engineers and construction workers in our resources in the Microsoft project, impact designers, engineers, and even environmental professionals. Some of the environmental concerns that follow. And to further account for that, we look to U.S. environmental policies, compensatory mitigation, which is a means of preserving or reestablishing any damage and harm to the environment that is done elsewhere. And also, we think that carbon credits could be something that can be enacted on the operators in the industrial parks to incentivize cleaner operations. There's also a huge security concern with cargo theft and also other organized crime, but the Mexican Navy has already been deployed to defend the railway. And so, and then also legal risk, there's just ongoing negotiations with local groups about relocation and compensation packages for that. So based on the risk severity matrix, we found that our 3 major risks of the cost overruns, environmental harm, and the cargo theft we're all in the moderate zone. And so therefore we decided that it's okay to go forward with the project.
Yeah, so kind of as a summary, like Anshuk has mentioned, this project isn't necessarily as financially viable as a lot of the projects we talked about earlier today, but the major advantages are the economic benefits. So we thought that the best way to look at whether or not this project was viable was looking at what's the worst case scenario, because there are some benefits. And when we look at that, in summary, we really just see that they're pumping $3.5 to $7 billion into the economy of southern Mexico. And that on its own will lift millions of people out of poverty, as it already has. I think it's also important to note that what they still need to build is almost all infrastructure that's just necessary for like southern Mexico to continue developing. So most of the work isn't now on building the Panama Canal alternative, but rather a port, like advanced ports and railroads that will just help develop the region as a whole. That's what we have for presentations. Anyone have any questions?
So obviously well-researched. I thought you guys did a great job. You know, it's worth mentioning that Mexico has more trade agreements in place than almost any other country on the planet. Its physical proximity to the US, the fact that it has historically had access to this huge market here in the US, and the technology transfer between the US and Mexico. Young labor force that's well educated, excellent transportation network. Setting this railroad aside, the rest of the country is pretty well equipped in terms of both road, you know, over the road trucking and rail. Did you use the Maya train as a benchmark in any of your analyses? Because the Maya train was recently completed up in the Yucatan Peninsula, similar distance, federally funded, federally driven. And as you were going through your environmental issues, and I was just chuckling on the inside because much like Colossus One, for Tesla, this Maya train was very controversial for having disturbed ruins, disrupted communities, having an environmental footprint that was atrocious, and frankly, you were worried about security from thieves, I guess, right? They were more subject to sabotage during construction, right? From the locals who were opposed to the whole construction project to begin with. So, did you guys look at Maya train?
We definitely looked at it.
Oh, go ahead.
We definitely looked at it for inspiration. As Devin mentioned earlier, the rail section of this it's pretty much underway.
Yeah.
And the main difference here is the industrial part. And even while building out the costs, they are a really big part of what they're trying to accomplish here.
But yeah, that's not federally funded.
Well, it's a mix. It's a mix of both public and private investment.
Okay.
I think it was 4 billion plus 1 billion.
Okay.
And so I think a lot of the issues you're talking about with that previous project, I think the industrial products here are the answer to that. But their version of sort of making it look better than just destroying communities. They're making these geological and agricultural mini cities that are supposed to allow for more growth around southern Mexico.
I know you mentioned a couple of times that the 10-year payback was problematic. I think when you look at infrastructure projects of this nature, you have to look at it from a different perspective. Unlike a drug that has a 20-year patent, this infrastructure could easily have a 40 to 50-year lifespan. Right? It's also an investment in our community. It's an investment in the future of the country, really, in many ways. So a 10-year payback may not be outrageous. I think it's just something that the country has to decide strategically, because we're talking about a bridge or a tunnel or a series of bridges and tunnels and roads that frankly don't necessarily have short-term paybacks. And then they never will. I mean, whether it was built in the U.S. or Mexico, right? The question is, how much risk is there in Panama failing, the canal failing as we know it today? Already, the crossings across the canal, the Panama Canal, have been seriously depleted because of the conditions on the ground, specifically with drought. And we don't see anything turning that around in the near term. So as that degrades, these sorts of options have to become, viable, right?
Yeah, a lot of our research showed us that like as an alternative to the Panama Canal, it's not necessarily it's a pretty high risk that it wouldn't be a great alternative. I think even at max capacity, this can only make it 5% of what the Panama Canal
Seriously
does.
Just 5%.
So it's definitely not like a replacement. It's like a potential alternative. But from when as we were researching, we sort of saw it more as using this entire CIIT as more of like a logistics hub rather than a pass-through section.
Okay. Is this an industrial corridor to begin with? Or no? Is it mostly rural and underpopulated and okay.
I mean, to start off, there are 2 ports there, and so there is some industrial buildup, but the railroad itself and the amount they're trying to modernize, I think, is definitely unseen.
Right.
It's one of the most ecologically diverse and rich regions, which is why it's so controversial from an environmental standpoint.
And so was the Yucatan Peninsula, but they hacked that to shreds too. So, I mean, literally, the feds, when they put in the Maya train, I think they did it in less than 3 or 4 years. So I'm wondering, the construction timeline you have seems much longer. I'm just wondering if that's conservative or maybe somehow the Maya train, because of its focus on tourism, not so much, heavy rail, makes a huge difference that somehow the tourists and the ability for the tourists to go from one tourist city to another, right? Right now, air is the only way they can do it, or bus. So in a sense, I think this solves a problem that no other alternative is out there.
And also, there are passenger stations that are yet to
So
be completed
is this going to be for passenger as well?
as well.
It's for
Freight?
both.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, we noticed a lot of the reason why the Maya train was finished was because of President AMLO, and he's no longer in office. So
And he was a bit of a force to be dealt with. Right?
Yeah, he had a lot. He did a ton of mega projects throughout Mexico. So now with the new president, I forget her name, but
Claudia.
Yeah, I think she's still for this, but it's definitely not as.
She's not going to ram it through the way.
AMLO, there was definitely issues in this project early on where they rushed it too quickly and things were collapsing. But now they're slowing down. Maybe the produce is
Got it. Okay. Well, great job. I'm glad to see it. Well done. So hopefully you guys had a taste of what some of what project management is like in different industries, right? You've had a variety of case studies. You've gone through the basics. I would encourage you, if you're anywhere close to wanting a PMP, assuming you have the experience to get it, the exam is probably easy to study for now that you've taken this class. It's probably a weekend's cramming. It is a 4-hour exam. It is like $500 expense, but it might be worth it. Some industries really value the PMP. Aerospace in particular really values project managers and program managers in particular, and they're hiring, so that's a good thing. Any last comments before we go? How was the class overall? Useful, valuable? Yep. Okay, well, thank you all. Have a good holiday, and I'll see you back on campus in January, right? Take care. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Good to have you, man. So you invite me. Well, who's good news we're getting better? Undergrads are a little bit more intense. Well, first of all, they live on campus. Grad students tend to be on computers, a little bit arm's length, right? Undergrads, they're building their future. This is the foundation.
I may have had lower less.
It's
still
they dig deeper.
Yeah.
They may not have the intuition, kind of, like I'll tell a joke in this class, and it doesn't go anywhere. Because they have no idea what I'm talking about.
No, I don't.
When it comes to like grad students,
आधा झूठ
they don't have the energy to do this.
ऐसा ही चल रहा है वो जब सवाल किया था इसने जो पुराना ट्रेन ट्रैक है पूरा दिमाग से
40%.
Yeah.
So it's like random. There's little difference there too, right? But the grad students are more. So guys. Yeah. Let me go. And these big. Yep, you guys did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
You learned something. At least you have something to show your parents. Yeah, this is what your tuition bought. Yeah.
Appreciate it. We'll
All right.
talk, okay?
Okay, thank you. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
I think I'm.
What did you think?